What would you do if the Pope asked you to fulfill his final wish, after he died? That question didn't appear on the news. It didn't show up in Elon Musk's Twitter feed. And no one expected it to arrive in the form of a sealed envelope, delivered by a silent cardinal in a storm-soaked Vatican hallway. But it did. It was 2:17 a.m. in Rome. Rain tapped against the cobblestones like ticking clocks. Under the pale wash of Vatican lighting, a single black Tesla, silent, smooth, and completely out of place, pulled away from St. Peter's Basilica. Inside it sat Elon Musk, alone. Not in his usual confident silence, but with a haunted look in his eyes. His hand trembled slightly, resting on a worn-out, hand-folded piece of parchment that smelled like old prayers and something else, maybe regret. A blurry phone video, taken by a tourist just outside the square, would later go viral in under 3 minutes. In the clip, Elon stares into the distance. He's not speaking. He's not tweeting. Just breathing. Some say he looked like he had seen a ghost. Others say he looked like he had become one. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? 12 hours earlier, everything was different. Elon Musk was scheduled to fly from Berlin to Austin. Routine. Starlink expansion updates, some internal chaos at X, and another round of Tesla performance debates. His private jet was already prepped, autopilot systems warm. But a phone call from someone simply listed in his contacts as V changed everything. He hadn't heard from V in over 4 years. A direct, encrypted message. Come to Rome. Urgent. Not negotiable. V. No details. No explanation. Just the kind of command that Elon, for reasons even he couldn't explain, felt he had to obey. Now, imagine this: you're the richest man on Earth, with 12 active companies, 5 kids, a past full of controversy, and the future of space travel riding on your back. And yet, suddenly, you're walking through the stone corridors of the Vatican. No cameras. No press. Just you. And a man in white waiting quietly under a massive fresco of the Last Judgment. Elon didn't kneel. But he did pause. Pope Francis, thinner than he looked on television, stood with a gentle hand outstretched. Not in power, but in presence. The air between them felt ancient. Not like religion. Like history itself had stopped breathing. Elon, the Pope said softly, I don't need your money. I need your heart. The conversation lasted 43 minutes. No one else was allowed inside. There are no recordings. No written transcript. Only Elon, and what he would later call, the most uncomfortable truth I've ever heard. What we do know is this: after that meeting, Elon delayed every public appearance. He cancelled interviews, paused meetings, and for 6 days, wasn't seen or heard from. Tesla stock dipped 3%. Reddit conspiracy threads exploded. Some said he had finally burned out. Others claimed he was building a secret Vatican AI project. But the truth? It began with a letter. The letter arrived in a white envelope. No seal. Just a red ink stamp, FJ, confidential. Francisco Jorge. The birth name of the Pope. Inside, 1 page. Handwritten. The words were deliberate. The tone, not of a priest, but of a man running out of time. Elon. If you are reading this, I am dead. I have asked many people for many things in my life. But this is the only thing I ask without knowing if you will say yes. She was 9 years old. Her name was Amal. She wrote me letters every month for 4 years. And then, one day, they stopped coming. She believed in a world where science and spirit could hold hands. Where machines could listen, and still learn to care. I failed her. But you, Elon, you still have time. Build me a star. And name it for her. That's all I ask. Francisco. Elon read the letter once. Then again. Then again. Each time, slower. Like the words were melting, not into understanding, but into obligation. Build me a star. What did that even mean? What did a man who didn't believe in God owe to the man most believed spoke for him? Here's what we know happened next. Elon didn't answer the Vatican. Not immediately. He returned to Texas, but refused to meet with anyone for days. He sat in the glass conference room of SpaceX, alone, with a cup of cold coffee and a 3D model of an unlaunched satellite spinning in silence. His team grew nervous. One executive texted. "Is he okay?" Another replied. "I think he's about to do something big. Or crazy. Or both." They were right. Because what came next would shake the very line between life, death, memory, and the stars. So now we ask you, if you had all the power, all the wealth, and just one strange request from the holiest man alive, would you say yes? Because Elon Musk just did. And that's only the beginning. The Vatican has many rooms. Some are lit by candlelight. Others by secrets. On the night of the meeting, Elon Musk didn't walk through the grand entrance of St. Peter's Basilica. Instead, he was escorted through a narrow side gate, just behind the Apostolic Palace. No cameras. No reporters. Just a single, silent Monsignor guiding him through marble corridors older than any nation still standing. Everything was still. Sacred. Suspended. "Why now?" Elon asked as they turned another corner, passing a statue of St. Augustine, whose eyes seemed to follow him. The Monsignor didn't answer. Only offered a small nod toward a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. "Elon," he said simply, "he's waiting." Inside, the room was unexpectedly simple. No throne. No choir music. No golden halos or incense swirling in divine light. Just two chairs. A wooden table. A glass of water. And Pope Francis, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but a plain white cassock, sleeves rolled up. Like a man about to build something, not bless it. "You're earlier than I expected," he said with a faint smile. Elon hesitated. "You didn't really give me much of a choice." Francis chuckled softly, and for a moment, the air eased. Two men. Two minds. Two worlds colliding in total silence. "Do you believe in souls, Elon?" the Pope asked, without introduction or small talk. "I believe in data," Elon replied, crossing his arms. "And probability. Souls aren't quantifiable." Francis leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Do you believe in memory?" "Of course." "And memory," the Pope said, "isn't that just the ghost of something real?" That stopped Elon. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he suddenly wasn't sure his answer was good enough. Francis reached beneath the table and pulled out a small wooden box. Unlatching the lid with worn fingers, he slid a stack of letters across the table. Each was handwritten in small, looping script. The kind of handwriting that comes from someone still learning how to shape their world with words. These, Francis said, were written by a little girl named Amal. Elon picked one up. The paper was thin, slightly stained, and smelled faintly of jasmine. The ink was smudged in places, like her hand had trembled while writing. He read the first line aloud. "Dear Papa Francisco, do you think robots can feel sad? Because I think my brother's drone cried when it crashed." He looked up, a flicker of something cracking beneath his usual analytical gaze. "She wrote to me every month for 4 years, the Pope said, voice tight. From Gaza. From a refugee camp. No Wi-Fi. No toys. Just hope, and questions. What happened to her?" Elon asked, though he already suspected the answer. Francis didn't blink. An airstrike. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence. He paused. You build rockets, Elon. She drew them. She believed in the stars the way I believe in grace. She believed you could get there, and bring back something better. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the Pope did something unexpected. He leaned closer, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. I have one request. I won't live to see it done. But I believe you can do it. Elon raised an eyebrow. This is where you ask me to donate satellites to the Vatican. Francis smiled, but there was no humor in it. I want you to build me a star. A star? Elon blinked. You know I don't control fusion, right? Not literally, Francis said. I want a piece of her, her letters, her drawings, her thoughts, digitized, stored, preserved, and launched. Not for data. Not for science. For remembrance. Elon tilted his head. You want me to upload a child's soul into space? I want you to prove that the things we love don't have to disappear. The room felt heavier now. Even for a man who had announced colonizing Mars, this was different. Elon wasn't being asked to lead a mission. He was being asked to carry a soul. But why me? Elon asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Francis looked him straight in the eyes. Because you're the only person on Earth arrogant enough to try, and just humble enough to make it mean something. And that was it. No blessing. No benediction. Just a single handshake. But before Elon turned to leave, the Pope added one last thing. When people look up at the night sky, they see beauty. But I think they're searching for something they've lost. He held up the last letter from Amal. Make sure they can find her. Hours later, Elon sat in the back of the Tesla Model X as it pulled away from the Vatican. He hadn't spoken since the meeting ended. In his hand, he held one of Amal's letters. Folded. Fading. His phone buzzed with updates from SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink. He didn't answer. He only stared out the window as the Vatican faded behind him, whispering to himself. Build me a star. The road ahead would not be scientific. It would not be clean. It would be personal. And for the first time in his life, Elon Musk wasn't chasing the future. He was chasing a ghost. Long before rockets, riches, or red carpets, there was just a boy. A boy named Elon. Pretoria, South Africa. Early 1980s. A house too big for the silence inside it, and a boy too curious to sit still. Elon Reeve Musk wasn't the kind of child who played soccer or chased dogs in the yard. He built things, awkward, often failing, sometimes exploding things. And he read. Constantly. Furiously. Like the answers to everything painful were hiding somewhere on the next page. But even a genius can't read their way out of being lonely. At school, Elon was a target. Too smart. Too small. Too strange. The other boys didn't understand him, and they didn't want to. One day, they beat him so badly he blacked out on the concrete steps behind the gym. They broke his nose. Bruised his ribs. Left him gasping for breath in a puddle of his own blood. He was 12. When his mother, May, came to the hospital, he didn't cry. Didn't say a word. He just clutched a worn copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and stared at the ceiling. If this world doesn't make sense, he once told her, maybe I'll build one that does. She didn't laugh. Because she knew he meant it. His father, Errol, was harder to impress. A mechanical engineer with a sharp mind and sharper temper, Errol believed in structure, discipline, and doing things the right way. Love came in cold servings. Hugs were rare. Praise, rarer. When Elon was 14, he built a crude computer program in BASIC and sold it to a magazine for $500. Errol didn't say, I'm proud. He said, "You should have asked for more." Elon learned then, building wasn't enough. Winning was the only way to be heard. After moving to Canada at 17, Elon began chasing something bigger. Not money. Not fame. Purpose. It burned in him like a second heart. He slept on couches, worked jobs no one knew about, survived on hot dogs and determination. At the University of Pennsylvania, he double-majored in physics and economics, not because it was impressive, but because he couldn't decide which version of reality he wanted to change first. Roommates recall him sleeping under his desk, ranting at 2 a.m. about the colonization of Mars or uploading human consciousness into machines. Elon never wanted to fit in, one classmate said years later. He wanted to outbuild the world. But even as his companies rose, Zip2, PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, there was always something missing. Something unspoken. He could conquer markets, disrupt industries, and launch astronauts into orbit. But he couldn't hold a marriage together. He couldn't keep a best friend around for more than a few years. And when asked what made him happy, he'd always pause. He had 5 sons. An empire of inventions. The adoration of millions. But joy? Joy was an alien concept. There's a story almost no one knows. Before SpaceX launched its first rocket, Elon took a solo trip to a desert outside Nevada. No cameras. No team. Just him, a telescope, and a box of old science fiction books. He camped under the stars, staring up into the void. One night, he scribbled something into a notebook. "I want to leave something behind that can't be destroyed. Not by time. Not by war. Something that matters." He tore the page out and buried it in the sand. No one's found it since. So why does all this matter now? Because when Pope Francis handed him those letters, from a child Elon had never met, from a place Elon had never been, something ancient stirred in him. Not guilt. Not sympathy. Recognition. He knew that kind of hope. The kind that survives bombings and silence. The kind that keeps writing letters even when no one writes back. It was the same thing that kept him coding in a cold dorm room, dreaming of Mars while eating canned beans. It was belief without proof. And for the first time, Elon felt like someone had handed him a mirror, not to reflect who he was, but who he used to be. In a quiet corner of the SpaceX control center, 2 days after returning from the Vatican, Elon opened a secure file on his laptop. Inside, digital scans of Amal's letters. Translated, catalogued, and lightly watermarked by the Vatican archives. He read them all. Every single one. Not like a CEO. Not like an engineer. But like a boy who once wondered if anyone in the universe would ever understand him. In one letter, she wrote. "Dear Papa Francisco. If I could send one thing to the stars, I would send my brother's drawing. He thinks the moon is lonely. I think you should give it a friend." Elon closed the laptop. Then whispered to no one in particular. Maybe the stars are lonely too. What makes a man change? Not power. Not pressure. But the feeling that somewhere, someone smaller than you once believed you could do something beautiful, and now, you finally want to prove them right. The world sees Elon Musk as a titan. Visionary. Disruptor. Meme lord. Mad genius. But behind the tweets and the tech, there's a man very few actually know. A man who doesn't sleep much. A man who walks the halls of his factories at 3 a.m. just to touch the machines. A man who sometimes sits in the dark alone, not because he's working, but because he doesn't know how not to. People think he's addicted to attention. But Elon Musk is addicted to building things he hopes will last longer than he does. For years, his life was one long sprint. From the sale of Zip2 to PayPal. From Tesla's bankruptcy scare to launching Falcon 1 into orbit after 3 failed attempts. There were moments when he risked it all, literally. He once said, I gave myself 6 weeks before everything I touched went bankrupt. That Christmas, I had to choose, fund Tesla or fund SpaceX. I wired money to both. People called him reckless, arrogant, obsessive. But deep down, there was another force at work. Fear. Not fear of failure. Fear of meaninglessness. He could live with bankruptcy. He couldn't live with being forgettable. His personal life suffered. A lot. His first son, Nevada, died of sudden infant death syndrome at just 10 weeks old. Elon rarely talks about it. But those who were close said something inside him never healed. He just locked it away, an old friend once said. Buried it beneath his work. Later, his marriages crumbled. His relationships often burned hot, then cold, then ended quietly. He dated actresses, artists, innovators. People as electric as he was. But always, eventually, the work pulled him back. One partner told a reporter. You don't date Elon. You orbit him. And eventually, you fall out. So why does any of this matter? Because a man like that, brilliant, relentless, emotionally armored, doesn't stop for anyone. But he stopped for her. Not Grimes. Not his kids. Amal. A girl he never met. Because something in her letters cracked him. She didn't ask for money. She didn't worship him. She just believed, in the stars, in machines, in the idea that technology could feel, not just function. She was the first person in a long time who reminded him what he used to feel, before the spotlight, before the ego, before the cynicism. Back in Austin, his team noticed the change. He was showing up late to meetings. Skipping press briefings. Spending long hours alone in a private lab on the 4th floor of the SpaceX tower. He even stopped tweeting for 3 whole days. That hadn't happened in years. Sam Altman called. Everything okay? Elon didn't answer right away. Finally, he said. I think I found something worth building that I can't sell. Sam paused. That's either really good or really dangerous. Elon hung up. Even his engineers noticed the shift. He asked them questions that made no sense, at first. If we uploaded a personality, how would we preserve emotional tone? What's the half-life of human memory in code? How long could something last in orbit, untouched, unseen, and still matter? They thought it was just another side project. Some sci-fi tangent that would fizzle out in a week. But they were wrong. One night, at 2:13 a.m., an internal SpaceX alert pinged the comms team. Project Eden, status initiated. No explanation. No announcement. Just a name. Eden. Something was beginning. Elon didn't sleep that night. Instead, he walked out onto the open-air rooftop of the SpaceX headquarters. The stars were scattered above him, brilliant and indifferent. And in his hand, he held another one of Amal's letters. He read it aloud, to no one. Dear Elon. I hope one day your rockets go far enough to find a place that doesn't hurt people. Maybe robots can help. Maybe you can too. But please, tell the stars I say hello. I think they're listening. He folded the letter. Held it to his chest. And for the first time in years, his voice cracked. I hear you, he whispered to the sky. The next day, he gathered a private team, just 6 engineers. Each hand-picked. Each sworn to silence. He told them the truth. They weren't building a satellite. They were building a memorial that could orbit forever. A digital star. One that contained her voice, her thoughts, her drawings, her dreams. Something that could outlive war, politics, platforms, and power. It's not a product, Elon said. It's a promise. And just like that, the man who'd spent his life trying to reach the future, decided to save the past. But even as the team got to work, some inside Tesla and X began asking questions. Investors grew nervous. His inner circle whispered. What the hell is he doing? They didn't know it yet, but Elon Musk was no longer building for the Earth. He was building for a ghost. Before he was Pope Francis, he was Jorge Mario Bergoglio. He was not born into sainthood. He was not raised in a cathedral. He was born in Flores, a working-class neighborhood in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The son of a railway accountant and a homemaker. A boy who grew up in the shadows of politics, poverty, and tango music. He smoked cigarettes. Danced in the streets. Fell in love once. Her name was Amalia. He even thought of getting married. But that was before the voice inside him got louder. Jorge was 21 when he nearly died from a lung infection. They removed part of his right lung. He spent weeks in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. He once told a close friend. I realized then, I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid of wasting my life. So, he chose God. But not as a man who wanted power. As a man who wanted to understand pain. His early years in the church were hard. He clashed with authority. Questioned rituals. Believed that the poor didn't need sermons, they needed shoes. He spent years in the slums of Buenos Aires, walking through mud, blessing babies, and listening to addicts scream at the sky. He buried children. Sat with women who had lost everything. Prayed with thieves who wept because no one else ever looked them in the eyes. And somewhere in all of that suffering, Jorge became Francis. Not a title. A calling. Named after Saint Francis of Assisi, the man who gave up wealth to serve the broken. But being Pope isn't easy, even when you wear humility like a second skin. There were politics. Power struggles. Scandals. The weight of 1 billion souls pressing down on him every morning as he looked out over the Vatican courtyard. He smiled for cameras. Hugged children. Gave speeches that made headlines. But at night, he sometimes sat alone in the chapel with tears in his eyes. They think I am holy, he once confessed. But holiness is just surviving without losing your softness. Then came her. Amal. The first letter arrived folded in a torn envelope with a UNICEF stamp. The handwriting was uneven, careful. Dear Pope Francis. I am not sure if this will reach you. My name is Amal. It means hope. I am 9 years old. I live in Gaza. I believe in peace. But mostly I believe in robots. He laughed when he read it. A soft, belly-deep laugh that startled the Swiss guard outside his door. Then he wrote back. Dear Amal. Yes, I received your letter. Robots are clever, but your hope is even stronger. Please write again. She did. Every month. For 4 years. Through her letters, he came to know her dreams. She loved astronomy, but had never seen a real telescope. She wanted to build an AI that could talk to God because she didn't trust people anymore. She once asked. If machines don't have hearts, can they still feel sorry for hurting someone? Francis didn't know how to answer that. But he kept writing. Kept sending her tiny gifts, solar-powered nightlights, a set of crayons, a photo of the Sistine Chapel. She called him Papa F. And he called her Little Star. Then, 1 month, no letter. Then 2. He reached out. Contacted aid workers. Asked officials. Nothing. After 3 months, a field nurse emailed him from Rafah. There had been an airstrike. Amal's tent was gone. No survivors. Francis didn't speak for an hour after hearing the news. Then he walked barefoot into the chapel, fell to his knees, and wept harder than he had in years. I carry many names in my prayers, he once told a cardinal. But only one still feels like a knife. He knew the world would forget her. That in the flood of politics, bombs, news cycles, and tweets, she'd vanish. And that broke him. Because she had believed. Not just in him. In humanity. In the stars. In the possibility that machines could love. So when he heard Elon Musk was in Rome for unrelated reasons, meeting with policymakers about AI and satellite regulations, he made a bold request. Bring him to me. I have a favor to ask of a man who thinks he can outbuild death. And when Elon sat before him, with that guarded, electric energy pulsing through every glance, Francis knew. This was the man. The man who could make Amal eternal. Not with faith. But with code. He gave Elon her letters. He gave him her story. He gave him a final wish. Build me a star. So when people look up, they remember the ones we've lost. Not as numbers. Not as casualties. But as light. Francis knew he wouldn't live to see the launch. He knew his breath was limited. But he also knew this. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who remembers you, and why. And now. The world still mourns his passing. But no one knows what happened in that small Vatican room. No one knows the promise that passed between the Pope and the billionaire. Not yet. But soon. The stars will speak. The decision wasn't made in a boardroom. There was no press release. No investors briefed. No slide decks or keynote. The only thing Elon Musk said that morning was this. We're building a payload that will never return. And just like that, Project Eden was no longer an idea. It was real. They gave it a name within hours, Amal. Not a code name. Not a technical term. A name that meant hope. In every meeting, in every file directory, across every display screen in the SpaceX mission lab, it appeared like a whisper that grew louder with every passing day. Amal version 1.0. Amal memory architecture. Amal launch window. To outsiders, it looked like just another satellite. But inside? It was something different. It was a soul, engineered. Elon wasn't building this one like a standard Starlink or weather monitor. This was personal. No solar arrays. No functionality required post-deployment, he told the team. It just has to last. That's the point. A preservation capsule. Cold storage for love, loss, and memory. A time-proof tomb orbiting Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. But instead of bones, it would carry belief. Inside the core, Amal's letters were laser-etched onto a graphene chip the size of a postage stamp. But that was just the beginning. Her voice, restored from fragments sent by aid workers, was run through a deep learning model trained on her syntax, her tone, even her childhood laughter recorded once during a UN interview. They weren't building a copy of her. They were building an echo. We can't simulate her soul, Elon told the AI lead. But we can make the stars remember the way she made people feel. That became the mission statement. Unwritten. Understood. But it wasn't all inspiration. It got messy. Technical disagreements. Emotional breakdowns. One engineer broke down crying when she read Amal's last letter aloud in a simulation test. Another quit the team entirely, saying, I signed up to build rockets. Not mausoleums. And still, the project grew. Elon worked differently now. He stopped micromanaging Tesla earnings. Stopped tweeting about Dogecoin. Stopped flirting with journalists. He spent his nights in the hangar. Reading Amal's words. Re-listening to her reconstructed voice. Sometimes he asked her questions out loud. And the AI system, trained on her writing and tone, answered back. One night, an engineer caught him asking. Do you think people like me can still be good? And the voice replied, softly. I think stars don't ask who's looking at them. They just shine. Meanwhile, journalists started to sniff around. What was going on at SpaceX? Why was Musk so quiet? Why were key resources being funneled into a mysterious, unnamed payload listed only as EDN-1? Some thought he was building a space memorial for Pope Francis. Others whispered about a rogue AI project. None of them were completely wrong. But none of them were even close to the truth. The Pope's final blessing, recorded months before his death, was encrypted into the capsule's core. If love can survive the vacuum of space, then perhaps we are not so alone after all. Elon cried when he heard it. He didn't tell anyone. He just stood in the testing room, eyes closed, hand pressed to the cold titanium frame of the capsule, like he was touching a gravestone. Launch day was set. June 17, Amal's birthday. The capsule would ride aboard a Falcon 9. Payload mass, 7.1 kilograms. Contents, letters. Audio. Drawings. Echoes. Destination, low Earth orbit. Final command, no re-entry. Once deployed, the satellite would become space debris by definition, but to Elon, and the people who knew the story, it would be a beacon. A reminder. A defiance of time. In the final build meeting, Elon stood before the team, thinner than usual, eyes heavier, voice softer. This isn't for headlines. Or revenue. It's for her. We build for billions. Today, we build for one. And no one spoke. Because everyone in that room had lost someone. And for the first time, they felt like their work might actually matter beyond product cycles and launch metrics. In an anonymous Reddit AMA later that year, a SpaceX engineer wrote, "You can feel it in the air. Like the rocket is carrying something holy. Not a payload. A prayer." They sealed the capsule with a custom engraving. Just 6 words, etched in microtext on the edge of the outer casing. She believed. We remembered. For her. No logos. No Musk. Just memory. Orbit bound. Cape Canaveral. June 17, 6:22 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Clear skies. Low wind. No weather anomalies. Everything was too perfect. The kind of day that makes you feel like the universe might be cooperating for once. No press was invited. No live stream was scheduled. This wasn't a PR stunt. But still, somehow, people found out. A Reddit thread leaked a flight manifest marked EDN-1. A photo surfaced showing Elon beside a small titanium pod etched with the name Amal. Someone recognized the launch window as symbolic. And then the internet did what it does best. It wondered. It asked questions. And then, it felt. Within hours, hashtags started trending. Hashtag for Amal. Hashtag launch of hope. Hashtag the rocket that remembers. Someone found one of Amal's old drawings, posted years ago by a UNICEF volunteer. A sketch of a little girl holding a balloon shaped like Saturn. It went viral. A poet on Twitter wrote, "They say stars are made of gas and time. But I think this one will be made of grief and grace." People didn't even know the whole story. They just knew, something was different this time. Elon said nothing. No tweet. No statement. He stood in the launch control room, arms crossed, eyes locked on the screen. He wore no suit. No SpaceX jacket. Just a plain black shirt. And a silver pin on his collar, a star with one name beneath it. Amal. At T-10 seconds, the countdown began. The engineers in the room all stood, holding their breath. But Elon? He closed his eyes. "Be more than debris," he whispered. Ignition. Liftoff. Falcon 9 cleared the tower. It rose like a prayer made of fire. The boosters roared against the blue. A tail of orange light cutting across the horizon like a comet. Inside the payload bay, surrounded by layers of carbon shielding, Amal's capsule sat silent. No power. No screen. No blinking light. Just presence. Just memory. Around the world, people stopped what they were doing. In Rome, hundreds gathered in St. Peter's Square. Candles flickered under a statue of Pope Francis. A choir began singing without direction, as if the voice of the city itself had remembered something holy. In Gaza, a group of children stood on a rooftop. A single radio played Amal's reconstructed voice, softly. "Tell the stars I said hello." One boy pointed to the sky. And smiled. The rocket's second stage separated. The capsule was deployed. Its trajectory locked, low Earth orbit. 90-minute cycles. No re-entry plan. It would orbit silently. Indefinitely. An untouchable gravestone in the sky. Then Elon finally spoke. He walked into the SpaceX media room, stepped in front of a single camera, and said, "There are over 8 billion people on this planet. Tonight, we made sure one of them will never be forgotten." Asterisk. He didn't take questions. He just walked out. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Not chaos. Not division. Stillness. Strangers posted drawings made by their kids and captioned them, "For Amal." AI artists created renderings of what the capsule might look like circling Earth. Musicians wrote lullabies using her letters as lyrics. And schools across 3 continents held Hope Days, asking children to write messages to the stars. Then something stranger. A satellite tracking site added Amal's capsule to its database. You could log in, find your location, and see when the capsule would pass overhead. The first night it became visible, servers crashed. Millions were watching. Waiting. Wishing. At 2:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Amal passed over North America. Phones lit up. Windows opened. Children pointed. Grandparents cried. And on a hill in Texas, Elon Musk sat on the hood of his car, eyes skyward, whispering the words that had started it all. "Tell the stars I said hello." It turns out, people weren't crying because it was sad. They were crying because it was beautiful. Because in a world obsessed with faster, louder, cheaper, someone had launched a satellite just to remember a child. And that kind of thing. It shatters you. One newspaper ran the headline. "Musk launched a machine that feels." But it wasn't the machine that felt. It was us. For the first time in a long time, we remembered how. The morning after the launch, the world woke up to a quiet echo. The usual news cycle, politics, stock reports, celebrity gossip, seemed irrelevant for the first time in years. People talked about Amal's launch as though they had just witnessed the most profound event of their lives. And maybe they had. In the United States, the launch made its way to primetime television. Tonight, we'll discuss the first human-made satellite that carries only a memory, and the strange man behind it. Elon Musk. The world was captivated. The trending hashtags continued to multiply. #ForAmal was everywhere, not just as a remembrance, but as a symbol of something people couldn't quite articulate. Across the Atlantic, in Europe, the reaction was more solemn. In the Vatican, Pope Francis's final words, broadcasted shortly before his passing, took on an added weight. "The stars know who we are, and they remember us even when we forget." The people in St. Peter's Square were no longer just fans of the Pope. They were believers in his message. And now, they had their own chance to send their love to the heavens. In Gaza, the silence of Amal's memory felt more poignant. After the rocket launch, there were no sirens. No explosions. Just quiet prayers from children who once stood on a rooftop watching for a glimpse of the capsule. "Tell the stars I said hello." The phrase spread like wildfire through social media. In refugee camps, across the Middle East, and into the corners of North Africa, people began painting the stars onto their walls and rooftops, their thoughts whispering toward the cosmos. They weren't just remembering Amal. They were remembering themselves. The reaction was not just one of sorrow. It was a revival. A revival of the things people had lost in the noise of modern life. Hope. Empathy. Love. All wrapped up in a child who never knew she would change the world. But not everyone saw it that way. While many embraced the idea of a child's memory becoming immortal, others were more skeptical. Critics in the media questioned the project's worth. It's a waste of resources, a distraction from the real issues. One child doesn't need a satellite, they need food and protection. The critics, mostly from the political and economic fields, were quick to accuse Elon of spending millions on a space vanity project, when the money could have been used for humanitarian aid. The arguments quickly made their way into newsrooms, debated with passion, and highlighted the growing division between the world's priorities. But Elon wasn't fazed by the backlash. "I don't build rockets to answer political debates," he told an interviewer. "I build rockets to change the future. And maybe, just maybe, I build them to change people's hearts." The debate over the mission became louder, but a quiet revolution was happening too, something that no one anticipated. People were starting to care again. About the stars. About the stories they shared. About the things that connected them, even across vast distances. At a local community center in a rural town in Ohio, a teacher read Amal's letters aloud to a class of young children. When the story was finished, the teacher asked, "Who wants to send a letter to the stars?" Every hand shot up. A global wave of letters, drawings, and poems began flooding the internet. People were using social media, post offices, and even private delivery services to send messages to the heavens, messages they never thought would matter, but now did. Amal had sparked something inside people, reminding them that their words, their voices, their existence, had meaning. And that even in the worst of times, they could still reach for something higher. As the months went by, the effects of the mission began to take root. Political leaders and philanthropists who had once focused purely on technological advancements now turned their gaze to the emotional and spiritual impact of space exploration. Elon Musk's statement about building not just rockets, but a future for humanity, became a rallying cry for those who were tired of seeing the world divided. A group of global leaders, many who had been critics of Musk's ambitious projects, now publicly stated that they were rethinking their approach to technology. In the wake of the launch, SpaceX had its busiest months ever. But the rush wasn't just about the usual engineering feats and billion-dollar contracts. It was about hope. People came to SpaceX not just to tour the facilities or buy shares. They came to understand what it meant to launch something that mattered beyond the physical. Something that, in the end, would touch more hearts than any satellite had ever before. Weeks after Amal's capsule entered orbit, Elon Musk sat alone in the darkened control room of SpaceX's headquarters. A single screen glowed in front of him, live data, Amal orbital parameters. He didn't touch the keyboard. He just stared. It had been the mission of his life, one he hadn't seen coming, one that he never knew he needed. And he couldn't help but think, maybe this was the legacy. "We're all just trying to find a way to make it through," Elon whispered to no one in particular. "But maybe in the end, the best we can do, is remember." And with that, he walked out of the room. The world was still divided. But something was shifting. People were remembering the stars. They were remembering Amal. They were remembering what it meant to hope. It was subtle at first, like a pebble dropped into a pond. A fleeting moment, a spark, and then, ripples. But in time, those ripples spread, fanning out into something far larger than anyone had imagined. Amal's mission had set something in motion that no one could stop. Not even Elon Musk. In a small village on the outskirts of Nairobi, a group of teachers came together. They had been inspired by the story of Amal and the satellite that carried her memory into space. A memory that had touched millions, yet no one outside of their village would ever know the full depth of the message it carried. What if we could send our children's stories into the stars? The teachers weren't thinking about space exploration or rockets. They weren't concerned with technology or funding. They were thinking about the children they taught. Children who grew up amidst conflict and poverty. They had no hope of reaching outer space, but they realized that they could send their voices up in their own way. Their children might not live to see a future where the stars were within reach, but they could send their words, their stories, into the cosmos. And so, they launched Project Stories to the Stars. A grassroots movement, starting with a few dozen children, soon gained momentum. The idea was simple: write letters, draw pictures, and send them to the stars in memory of Amal, to ensure that the world would never forget the voices of the most vulnerable. Within weeks, the idea spread to refugee camps in Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. The United Nations picked up the movement. It was now a global initiative to encourage children to share their dreams, hopes, and memories through art and storytelling. They were sending not just messages to the stars, but to humanity itself. And the response? It was overwhelming. As the United Nations and NGOs got involved, thousands of letters from children across the world began pouring in. They shared stories of hardship, loss, and hope, stories of survival, friendship, and perseverance. All of them, a testament to the strength of human resilience. Back in the United States, the emotional impact of Amal's launch did not fade. Instead, it morphed into something that could not be ignored. Inspired by the idea of memory, love, and the potential of space exploration, young activists began rallying for a new movement. It wasn't just about climate change anymore. Or global poverty. Or the thousands of issues that activists had fought for over the past decades. This was something more, a movement to unite humanity under one cause, the remembrance of every lost life, every child's dream, every forgotten voice. The movement became known as the Collective Hope Initiative. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about profit. It wasn't about solving all the world's problems. It was about acknowledging that each life, no matter how small, no matter how far away, deserved to be remembered. With a simple rallying cry, we remember. Together. The movement began to grow. Celebrities joined in. Writers published books. Artists created murals. Thousands of ordinary people took to social media, posting photos and stories of people they had lost, people they had loved, people they had forgotten to remember. Back at SpaceX, the team continued working on the next phase of their interplanetary goals, but the launch of Amal's satellite had changed something in them, too. It was no longer just about technology. It wasn't just about reaching Mars or making space travel more accessible. Elon Musk had always been known for his ability to think big, to stretch the limits of what was possible. But now, with Amal's capsule circling the Earth, his vision had evolved. Maybe we don't need to look at space as the final frontier, Elon said during an interview, his voice carrying more weight than it ever had before. Maybe the true frontier is how we remember. And how we let the future know that we cared enough to send our stories to the stars. SpaceX, in collaboration with several other tech companies, began work on a new project, the Memory Network. The idea was simple yet revolutionary: a digital archive, a global database of human memories. Through art, stories, videos, and letters, people from all over the world could contribute their personal experiences to be preserved for future generations. The Memory Network wasn't about creating a database of data, it was about capturing the essence of humanity. The joy, the sorrow, the laughter, the pain. Every small piece that made up the human condition. Meanwhile, social media continued to play a significant role in keeping Amal's legacy alive. Memes, posts, and videos of people sending letters, drawings, and messages of hope to the stars filled Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. One particular video gained millions of views. It showed a little girl, no older than 7, holding up a piece of paper with a drawing of her family under the stars. She spoke softly into the camera, her eyes filled with wonder. "This is for Amal. And for all the people who can't see the stars anymore. We will always remember you." That video was shared by tens of millions. But more importantly, it was shared by the very people who had once been disconnected from the broader world. In corporate boardrooms and policy discussions, there was a noticeable shift. Corporate social responsibility was no longer just about charitable donations or sustainability reports. It was about remembering the people that couldn't afford to be forgotten. World leaders began to voice the importance of preserving memories and honoring lives. Countries all over the world put aside their political differences to join in the global remembrance. New schools, libraries, and museums dedicated to stories of loss and resilience began to emerge. For the first time in history, the world wasn't just talking about the future. They were talking about the past, and how important it was to carry those lessons forward. A year after Amal's satellite launched into space, Elon Musk stood once more before the media, this time with a much larger smile than before. "I never expected this," he said. "When we launched Amal, we thought we were sending a satellite into orbit. But instead, we sent a message. A message to the future, to the people we'll never meet, and to the children who will remember our words. And that, I think, is the greatest thing we could have done." Elon paused. A look of quiet reflection passed over him. It's not about the technology anymore. It's about the human connection. It always has been. It had started with a single satellite, a single child, and one man's decision to build something that reached beyond the stars. And now, it had grown into a worldwide movement, a movement that was changing the way the world remembered, the way it acted, and the way it cared. Amal's satellite might have been the spark, but the movement that followed wasn't driven by Elon Musk or SpaceX alone. It was driven by ordinary people, many of whom would never be recognized. These were the unseen heroes, the ones who turned an idea into action and breathed life into the growing global movement. As the ripple effect spread, the lives of these individuals intersected with the legacy of a little girl whose memory had touched the stars. They were the ones who picked up the pieces and built something new, something no one had ever expected. In Nairobi, Maria was one of the teachers who had first proposed the idea of sending children's letters to the stars. She had no idea where it would lead or how it would affect her life, but she knew one thing for sure: the children of Nairobi deserved to be heard. Maria had grown up in a similar community, where dreams were often squashed before they could even take flight. Her own childhood had been spent in the shadow of poverty and war, with little hope for a future beyond survival. Yet, she had always clung to the belief that stories mattered, that memories mattered. And as she stood in front of a classroom filled with eager young faces, she was determined to give them the same hope she had once dreamed of. One morning, she asked her students to write about their families, their dreams, and the places they wanted to see. They wrote about their mothers, their fathers, and their siblings. They wrote about the things they loved and the things they feared. When the letters were collected, Maria carefully read each one. The heart-wrenching honesty in each letter brought tears to her eyes. She had heard stories of loss before, but these stories, written by children barely old enough to understand the complexities of the world, held a raw truth that she hadn't expected. One child, Amina, had written, "I want to go to space. I want to see my father who died last year. I want to tell him that I am safe, and that I love him. Maybe the stars will tell him for me." Maria held Amina's letter in her hands for a long time, realizing just how powerful their words could be. This was more than just a movement. It was a lifeline. And it was all possible because of the chance to remember. The letters were sent into the global movement, but for Maria, it was more than that. It was a personal mission to bring hope to her community. She began teaching her students that their voices mattered, no matter how small, no matter how distant. And as she saw the ripple effect spread, she realized that their voices were now heard by the world. In the refugee camp in Syria, Javier was a volunteer aid worker who had seen too much suffering to believe in anything but the practical. The hunger, the displacement, the endless nights spent comforting families torn apart by war, it all blurred together. But when he saw the movement surrounding Amal's satellite, he felt something stir inside him. It was the first time in years that he thought about hope in a way that wasn't about survival. It was about connection. Javier had worked with refugees for years, yet he never once thought about what he could do to truly connect the stories of these people with the world. He had been focused on the basics, water, food, shelter, but when he saw the letters from children in Africa, the stories that went to space, he realized how much these refugees had to offer. Javier organized a group of local volunteers to create a safe space for children to write their own letters. They wrote about the places they had left behind, the families they had lost, and the dreams they still carried with them. Javier read these letters, and his heart broke with every word. "Dear world, I am still here. I have not forgotten you. And one day, I will rebuild my home, even if I am far away. The stars are my home now." It was this simple act of writing down their dreams and fears that allowed the children to heal, at least in small ways. Through the memory network, their letters were sent to space, and with each letter, they felt a little closer to their lost homes, their lost families. Javier wasn't just a volunteer anymore. He became a spokesperson for the forgotten. A quiet advocate for the voiceless, using the legacy of Amal's mission to bring awareness to the plight of refugees. He traveled the world speaking about the power of storytelling, how it could heal, how it could connect people across impossible distances. Lena, a young artist in Berlin, had never imagined that a simple message about a little girl and a satellite would become the catalyst for something so large. But it had. Inspired by the movement, Lena began painting murals across the city, depicting scenes of children gazing up at the stars. Her work captured the emotional essence of the movement, the idea that every person, no matter their background, had the right to be remembered. Her murals were vibrant, alive with color and hope, and soon, they began to pop up in cities across Europe. The response was overwhelming. People started visiting the murals, standing in front of them, and sharing their own stories. It became an open space for remembrance, where anyone could come and reflect on their loved ones, their struggles, and their dreams. The murals became more than just art, they became a part of the collective healing process. As Lena painted the final mural in a small neighborhood park, she realized something profound. The project she had started had become a global effort. She had no idea how it had grown so large, but it had. And now, it was part of a bigger picture, one that connected people across continents, across cultures. By now, the Collective Hope Initiative had evolved into a massive global movement. There were those who still focused on the practical issues, climate change, political reform, poverty, but there was a growing recognition that hope, memory, and connection were just as essential to human progress. At its core, it was a movement dedicated to ensuring that no person, no matter their circumstances, would ever be forgotten. It wasn't just about raising awareness, it was about building a new foundation for humanity, one that was centered around compassion and shared stories. The organization's leaders, many of whom had once been skeptics of Elon Musk's space ventures, now sat in roundtable discussions, trying to figure out how to continue this mission. The world had changed, and they knew it. As the movement grew, Elon Musk found himself reflecting more deeply on his role. In the beginning, he had seen the satellite launch as just another technological milestone. But now, he saw something else. "We thought we were building rockets to explore Mars," he said during an interview. "But what we were really doing was giving people something to hold on to. A chance to remember. A chance to heal." Elon had often been seen as the man who pushed the boundaries of space, but now, he was seen as the man who pushed the boundaries of memory. The unseen heroes were still working, still creating, still remembering. They were the ones who had carried the legacy of Amal to places no satellite could reach. They were the true force behind the movement, changing lives and ensuring that the stars would always shine with the memories of those who had been forgotten. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a quiet moment when the world changed. But it wasn't in a dramatic speech, nor was it a moment that appeared on the evening news. It was in the boardrooms, the halls of parliaments, and within the hearts of ordinary people who had found something unexpected, the importance of remembering. The ripple effect of the global movement had reached an unprecedented point. The United Nations, for the first time in history, dedicated an entire conference to the notion of human memory and its role in shaping the future of global cooperation. The conference, called Remembering Tomorrow, Humanity's Collective Future, was attended by world leaders, philanthropists, artists, scientists, and activists. The conference's opening keynote was delivered by none other than Elon Musk, who had initially been hesitant to engage in global policy discussions but found himself speaking at the forefront of a movement that had, in some ways, taken on a life of its own. What we're witnessing here today is a fundamental shift in how we think about progress, Elon began, standing before an eager audience. It's no longer just about building new technologies. It's about understanding the legacy we leave behind. The stories we share, the lives we honor, that's what will shape the future. His words resonated with the crowd. Global governance, which had always been concerned with issues like economics, security, and conflict resolution, was now looking at something new, how remembrance and legacy could affect not only how nations cooperate but how they resolve conflicts, approach climate change, and care for the most vulnerable. As the conference continued, leaders from around the world shared their thoughts on the subject of memory and its impact on national policies. Angela Merkel, former Chancellor of Germany, spoke about how collective memory had been an essential part of Germany's healing process after the World Wars, noting, "In Germany, we've learned that it's not enough to just look forward. We must always remember what brought us here. Only then can we truly build a peaceful future." The leaders gathered at the conference proposed a bold new agenda, the Memory Mandate. A global policy initiative aimed at integrating the remembrance of lost lives, cultures, and histories into the structure of governance. The plan called for nations to invest in systems that preserved memories, whether through art, education, technology, or public policy, ensuring that future generations would never forget the lessons of the past. The United Nations General Assembly quickly adopted the initiative, leading to an unprecedented collaboration between governments, private organizations, and citizens. Governments began establishing memory archives, museums, and centers dedicated to remembering the marginalized, the forgotten, and the lost voices that had been neglected for centuries. With the memory mandate in place, the conversation shifted to policy reforms. For the first time, discussions about climate change, war, and global inequality were framed not only in terms of data and statistics but through the lens of human stories, stories of survival, perseverance, and loss. In Washington, D.C., a young senator named Elena Garcia, inspired by the movement, introduced a bill that would allocate federal funds for the creation of remembrance institutions in every state. These institutions would serve as places for communities to come together, reflect on their histories, and ensure that future generations would honor the sacrifices made by previous ones. Our nation's strength lies not in how much we accumulate, but in how much we remember, Elena said in her first speech on the Senate floor. We cannot continue to ignore the stories of the most vulnerable. We must preserve them, for they are the foundation of our shared humanity. The bill passed with overwhelming support, and soon, the United States was investing in the preservation of the memories of its most marginalized communities, including indigenous populations, immigrants, and those who had lived through struggles like slavery and civil rights movements. In Paris, Lena, the artist from Berlin, was invited to collaborate on an international art installation that would become part of the Remembrance exhibition in the newly established Museum of Collective Memory. The installation would be the largest of its kind, with murals, photographs, sculptures, and digital art representing the voices of children who had been part of the movement. Lena's murals, which once had been displayed on streets in Berlin, were now featured in exhibitions across Europe. They depicted the faces of children gazing up at the stars, a visual reminder of the dreams that transcended borders, languages, and circumstances. The installation was designed not only to showcase the stories of the children whose letters had gone into space but also to honor the sacrifices of their families and the resilience of entire communities. Visitors could walk through the exhibit, listen to audio recordings of the letters, and feel the emotional weight of these stories. It was a tribute to the past, a warning for the future, and a call to action for the present. Art is memory, Lena said in an interview. It's not just about what we create in the moment, but what we leave behind. These children are no longer forgotten. Their voices will live on forever. The memory mandate's impact extended into education, as countries around the world adopted new curricula that emphasized the importance of history, empathy, and remembrance. Schools began to teach the stories of those who had been erased from history, stories of injustice, of conflict, of resilience. In the United Kingdom, King's College London introduced a new program called Remembering the Future, a cross-disciplinary course that combined history, ethics, and technology to teach students about the importance of preserving memories for future generations. Students were encouraged to interview older generations, capture their stories, and share them through digital media platforms. We are not just learning about the past, one student wrote in their final paper. We are learning how to carry it with us, and how to use it to build a better future. Around the world, communities were embracing the idea that remembrance was the key to healing. In refugee camps, people who had been displaced for years began telling their stories in new ways, with the support of organizations and activists who had once been part of the initial movement. These stories were now archived, stored, and shared through the memory network, ensuring that future generations would remember not only the stories of the survivors but also the importance of never forgetting. One such story came from Rami, a Syrian refugee who had lost his family in the war. Through the memory network, Rami was able to connect with others who had similar stories, and together, they began writing a collective memoir, one that would be preserved in the memory archive for future generations. At the close of the conference, Elon Musk delivered one final speech that encapsulated the essence of everything that had happened since Amal's satellite had launched. When we sent Amal's memory to the stars, we didn't just send a piece of technology. We sent something that connected us all, a message of love, of remembrance, of humanity. And today, we're not just talking about space, we're talking about how we make space for each other. And for the stories that matter. The legacy of memory had grown into something that no one could have predicted. From a single, heartfelt gesture came a global shift, a shift in how we viewed not just the future, but also the past. And with that shift came the realization that humanity would always be remembered. As the dust settled from the monumental shift brought on by the memory mandate, the world stood at the precipice of something entirely new. The global conversation about memory, legacy, and connection was no longer a fleeting moment, it had become a cultural cornerstone, fundamentally altering how humanity viewed progress, technology, and each other. But the future was still unwritten. The world had taken a giant leap forward, but what would happen next? What would we do with the lessons we had learned? The changes brought about by the memory mandate were profound, but they were only the beginning. As countries began implementing the global initiative, new ideas sprouted from every corner of the globe. Each nation, community, and individual had their own interpretation of what it meant to preserve memory, not just as a historical archive, but as a guiding force for the future. In Japan, an innovative project called Eternal Connections was born. It aimed to digitize the memories of families who had been displaced during the tsunami, using augmented reality to bring those memories to life. Families could visit special memory parks where they could interact with holograms of their loved ones, reliving precious moments and telling stories that could be preserved for future generations. In Kenya, a group of scientists and educators launched Future Voices, an initiative designed to empower children to document their lives in real time. Using wearable technology, children could capture their thoughts, dreams, and experiences, and have them archived as part of a global, ever-expanding memory network. These voices would not only preserve the individual stories of children but would be available to researchers, educators, and future generations, giving a dynamic, real-time glimpse into the lives of tomorrow's leaders. It was becoming clear that the world had moved beyond simply remembering the past. Now, people were starting to view memory as something interactive, something that could shape the future. Every story, every moment, had potential. And the stories being told, whether they were ones of struggle or triumph, would inform the future, guide decisions, and ensure that no one was forgotten. It wasn't just about preserving memories, it was about how technology could enhance these memories, taking them beyond the simple act of remembering. In Silicon Valley, new companies sprouted up, dedicated to developing emotion-driven artificial intelligence that could recreate the essence of a person's memory. These AIs were trained to respond to personal stories, offer emotional guidance, and even provide comfort to people who had lost loved ones. Elon Musk's companies, long focused on exploring the unknown, now turned their attention to humanity's collective emotional landscape. With Neuralink, Musk envisioned a future where the connection between memory and technology could be even more profound. Imagine a world where people could upload their memories, not just for storage, but for interaction, sharing, and even collaboration. A person's experiences could be experienced by others, teaching empathy, understanding, and creating a deep bond between people from vastly different walks of life. Memory is not just about looking back, Musk said during an interview on the topic. It's about creating pathways for empathy, for deeper understanding. Our memories are what connect us. Now we have the chance to do something unimaginable, to share those memories with others in real time, to feel what they felt, to experience their stories as our own. It was a vision that stretched the limits of possibility. But now, it wasn't just about advancing technology. It was about creating technology that could deepen human connection, transform how we perceive the past, and how we view the future. As the years passed, the movement surrounding the memory mandate evolved into something far greater than anyone had imagined. It became a global consciousness, a collective sense of responsibility not just for ourselves, but for future generations. A sense that what we remembered, what we chose to preserve, was what we would leave behind for the future to carry forward. Maria, the teacher from Nairobi, continued her work, now as an ambassador for the movement. Her work with children in Nairobi had expanded, and she had started training teachers worldwide, emphasizing the importance of helping children connect with their past, understand their own histories, and see how they could become part of something bigger than themselves. She often visited refugee camps in the Middle East, working with displaced children to help them capture their stories, their dreams, and their hopes. These children, many of whom had witnessed unimaginable loss, now had the power to preserve their memories, not just in photographs or letters, but through interactive storytelling. The past is not just a memory, Maria said in one of her speeches. The past is a guide. It is what tells us who we are, what we've been through, and how we can move forward. The stories we carry with us will shape the future. The memory mandate was no longer a policy, it was a movement of the heart. It inspired people to honor not just their own lives but the lives of others, to ensure that no one would be erased, no story lost. However, the movement also had its critics. Not everyone believed that collective memory was the answer. Some argued that the emphasis on remembering could lead to a stagnation of progress, that humanity could become obsessed with the past at the cost of moving forward. Javier, the aid worker turned activist, who had seen firsthand the way that suffering could sometimes be romanticized, began to question the direction of the movement. There is a danger, he said at a recent panel discussion, in using memory as a crutch. We need to honor the past, yes, but we must also confront the reality that sometimes, our memories can hold us back. We cannot afford to be trapped in the past. We must look forward. We must rebuild. Javier wasn't alone in his skepticism. Some communities, especially those deeply entrenched in political struggles, feared that overemphasizing memory could exacerbate divisions, keeping people focused on past injustices rather than building new systems of equity and justice. The challenge was clear: how could the world balance remembrance with progress? Despite these challenges, there was a growing consensus that memory had a place in the forward movement of society, not as something that would hold us back, but as a tool to ensure that progress was not made at the expense of humanity. As the world continued to evolve, the conversation surrounding memory began to focus not just on the preservation of past lives but also on the narratives of the future, how stories of the present would be recorded and shared. At a World Summit held in Geneva, global leaders gathered to discuss the role of memory in shaping new technologies, from artificial intelligence to space exploration. The discussion took a bold turn when a young scientist from India suggested that space exploration itself, the very essence of technological advancement, could be shaped by memory. If we are to colonize Mars, she said, we must first ask, what stories will we carry with us? What will we leave behind for those who come after us? Our memories, our histories, our cultures, they will be the seeds of the new world. This idea, once seen as science fiction, was now a central topic of conversation. The idea that humanity's journey into space could be fueled not just by technology but by memory began to take root. The legacy of Amal's satellite, its message of remembrance, was slowly becoming a guiding force for not just the present but the future. As the world embraced these new ideas, the future began to take shape. It was a future grounded in empathy, remembrance, and the understanding that humanity's strength lay in its shared stories. The technological advancements that once seemed solely about progress now had a deeper purpose: to connect, to preserve, and to ensure that future generations would never forget the lessons learned from those who had come before them. The future, as it turned out, was never just unwritten, it was being written every day, by the stories we chose to preserve and the stories we chose to tell. The world had changed in ways that were hard to comprehend. What started as a movement to preserve the memories of a few had now evolved into a global phenomenon that had spread to the very farthest reaches of human ambition: space exploration. The launch of Amal's satellite had been the spark, but the growing memory mandate had now woven itself into the fabric of every scientific and technological advancement. As humanity looked beyond the Earth's atmosphere, it was not just the advancements in rockets and AI that captured global attention, it was the stories. The stories of where we came from, where we were going, and the legacy we wished to leave behind. In 2035, humanity achieved its greatest milestone to date. The first successful mission to colonize Mars was no longer a distant dream, it was a reality. What made this mission different from all others was its human element: the stories of Earth. Every aspect of the mission was informed not just by the data, the science, and the technology, but by the collective memory of humankind. The mission was called Voyage of the Heirs, a nod to the fact that those traveling to Mars would not just be pioneers of technology, but heirs to the memories of Earth. Each astronaut aboard was tasked with carrying with them a memory capsule, a digital archive of stories, letters, songs, photos, and artwork from across the world. These archives were meant to serve as a tangible connection to Earth for future generations, ensuring that the story of humanity would live on no matter how far they traveled from home. Elon Musk, the man whose vision had played a crucial role in advancing the idea of humans on Mars, stood at the forefront of the mission. But this time, his motivation was no longer about technology or innovation. His motivation was about preserving the human story for future generations, a story that was now bound to travel across space. "We're not just sending rockets to Mars," Musk said at the mission's launch. "We're sending humanity's collective memory. We're making sure that, no matter where we go, we carry who we are with us." This statement captured the essence of the mission. The stars above were not just distant points of light, they were a reminder that the stories of the past could guide the future. As the astronauts prepared to leave, the world watched. But the memory mandate had already expanded well beyond Earth. In orbit, there was already an interstellar archive, a space station that housed the memories of every person on Earth, memories of love, loss, triumph, and hardship. This archive was accessible to anyone with the means to travel to space, but more importantly, it was a repository for the future. As Amal's satellite had become a symbol of the universal need to preserve memory, this new station, dubbed the Memory Nexus, became a physical representation of the movement's culmination. Inside the station were digital vaults, containing millions of stories from every corner of the Earth, waiting to be discovered by future civilizations. The Nexus wasn't just a technological marvel, it was a statement. A statement that humanity was not simply reaching for the stars, it was doing so with the knowledge that the stars themselves would soon be the keepers of our memories. Mars itself, however, was where the most radical shift occurred. The new Mars colony, known as New Earth, became the living embodiment of humanity's evolution. The people who settled there carried not just their own memories, but the memories of every single human being who had come before them. In the first settlement ceremony on Mars, the people of New Earth didn't just plant flags or build infrastructure. They planted a memory tree, a symbolic gesture that represented their commitment to remembering their origins and the sacrifices made by those who had come before them. This tree was a living symbol, a reminder that memory wasn't just about the past, it was about shaping the future. The colonists were given access to the memory nexus, and every single story was available for them to read, hear, and experience. Virtual reality pods were available to allow them to immerse themselves in the lives of their ancestors, to feel the emotions, struggles, and victories that had shaped Earth. As new generations were born on Mars, they could listen to the stories of the Earthbound generation, preserving their memories even if they had never stepped foot on the old world. "We're not just starting over," said Lena, an artist now living on Mars. "We're continuing the journey. These memories will help us understand the mistakes of the past and the triumphs. And in doing so, they will guide us toward a better future." Lena's art, which had once depicted the earthbound stories of children, now reflected the new stories of the Martian settlers. Her murals depicted the first birth on Mars, the joy and wonder of new beginnings, yet still carrying the ghosts of Earth's past. Memory was the thread that tied everything together. As humanity established a foothold on Mars, scientists began to make astounding discoveries about the nature of memory itself. Working with AI and advanced neural technology, they discovered that memory was not just a tool of remembrance, it was a source of immense power. Through neurosynaptic interfaces, researchers on Mars began to tap into a deep and uncharted territory of human consciousness. They discovered that memories, when shared and experienced collectively, could amplify human potential. These shared memories could be used to heal emotional trauma, enhance creativity, and even advance learning and problem-solving. The memory nexus was more than an archive, it was a catalyst for evolution. Elon Musk, who had been deeply involved in this project, realized that the memory nexus was no longer just about preserving the past. It was about unlocking the untapped potential of humanity. Memories could now be used as tools to empower future generations, helping them avoid past mistakes, learn from collective wisdom, and ultimately build a future where no one would ever feel isolated, forgotten, or alone. As the years passed, Amal's legacy grew ever more profound. The satellite that had carried the voices of children to the stars now served as a beacon, a reminder that the voices of those who had once been voiceless were now being heard across the universe. Amal was no longer just a symbol, it was a turning point. The memory mandate, which had been born from a single gesture, had now grown into a global movement that had reached the very stars themselves. The children whose letters had gone into space were now symbols of humanity's deepest values, empathy, connection, and remembrance. And the more humanity expanded into the cosmos, the more Amal's message resonated, that no matter how far we traveled, no matter how far we advanced, we would never forget the past, and we would never stop carrying those memories with us. The world that had once been divided, fragmented by wars, ideologies, and boundaries was now united in a new way. Memory, once considered a passive act, had become the foundation of progress, guiding every decision, every step taken by humanity as it ventured into the unknown. The future was written not just in rockets or artificial intelligence, it was written in the stories of those who had lived and loved and suffered. It was written in the collective memory of every human being, carried across space, waiting to inspire future generations to reach even higher. The final frontier wasn't just a place in the universe, it was a place in our hearts, in our minds, and in the memories we carry with us. "The stars are not distant," said Elon Musk during a final press conference on the eve of the Mars colony's grand opening. "They are the stories of those who came before us. And as we reach for them, we are carrying their memories with us. We are bringing them home." By 2045, the idea that memory could be a foundation for progress had spread far beyond the confines of Mars. The memory mandate had fundamentally reshaped Earth and its colonies. What had begun as a movement to preserve memories had evolved into a global infrastructure, an interconnected system of personal, cultural, and historical memory archives known as the Memory Network. The memory network was not just an archive, it was the new internet of the human soul, a digital ecosystem that allowed individuals, cultures, and even entire nations to connect not just through data, but through emotion, experience, and legacy. It all began with Neuralink and the advancements in neural technology. Elon Musk's company, once known for its ambitious goals of brain-machine interfacing, had evolved into the key player in the development of the memory network. The Neuralink systems, now refined and perfected, allowed individuals to upload and share their memories directly with others. These shared memories could be experienced in immersive, hyper-realistic virtual environments, where people could feel, smell, and even sense the emotions that accompanied the moments. The memory network was a direct result of these advancements. It was not just a digital platform for storing memories, it was a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving as people uploaded their experiences, dreams, and ideas. The memory network isn't just a tool, said Sophia, a lead neuroscientist at Neuralink during a landmark conference. It is the future of human connection. It is the bridge between our past, our present, and our future. It is where memories evolve and grow, where empathy becomes the backbone of society. Each memory uploaded into the memory network was encrypted, protected, and stored across decentralized servers spread throughout Earth and its colonies. There was no single entity that controlled the flow of memories, allowing the entire system to be a vast, interconnected web that no government, corporation, or person could dominate. As the memory network grew, so did its impact on society. What began as a way to preserve individual memories quickly became a tool for fostering understanding and empathy on a global scale. People began to upload not just their personal stories, but their cultural heritage, family histories, and shared experiences. The world was no longer divided by borders or ideologies. Instead, people were united by the memories that connected them, regardless of where they came from or what their past had been. For example, a woman in Brazil could now experience the life of a farmer in India, feeling the sweat on their brow, hearing the sounds of their village, and understanding their struggles. A young man in Japan could experience the joy of a child in a refugee camp in Syria, seeing the world through their eyes, their hopes, and dreams. This sharing of experiences began to transform societies. People no longer simply heard about others' experiences, they lived them. Empathy became the most powerful force in the world, as people understood one another not through words, but through shared experiences. We are no longer just citizens of our countries, said Maria, one of the early advocates for the memory mandate. We are citizens of the world. The memory network has connected us in a way we never thought possible. Our pasts and our futures are no longer separate. They are one, and they belong to all of us. With the rise of the memory network, new industries were born. The memory economy, as it became known, was fueled by the exchange of experiences and stories. People began to create memory experiences, where they could trade, sell, or gift their memories. Artists, now able to directly communicate their emotions and creativity through shared memory, were in high demand, creating immersive virtual worlds where others could live out their stories. Companies emerged that specialized in memory-enhancing technology, using neural interfaces to enhance and perfect the experiences of memory sharing. Some individuals used these advancements to relive their past, while others sought to create entirely new memories, constructing digital experiences that fused reality with imagination. At the same time, a growing memory marketplace allowed people to monetize their experiences. A musician could sell a memory album, offering an emotional journey through their life, with each song representing a pivotal moment in their personal history. A teacher could share a memory lesson, offering an immersive walkthrough of historical events, allowing students to feel as if they were actually present during critical moments of human history. We're not just living in the moment anymore, said Javier, an entrepreneur who had launched a memory experience company. We're living in the past, the present, and the future all at once. The memory economy is creating a world where we can experience everything, not just with our senses, but with our hearts and minds. The most profound transformation, however, was seen in how global conflicts were approached. With access to the memory network, world leaders and diplomats began to use shared experiences as a tool for peacebuilding. Instead of negotiating treaties based on political interests, countries started to negotiate through shared memory, allowing nations to understand each other's historical traumas, cultural struggles, and ambitions. In one groundbreaking peace summit held in 2047, leaders from both Israel and Palestine agreed to upload their memories of key moments in their shared history, allowing their people to experience the other's pain, hopes, and dreams. It was a powerful act of empathy, one that had never been possible before, but was now facilitated by the memory network. As these moments of empathy played out, borders began to blur. People started to identify less with national identity and more with human identity. The memory network had become the central thread of global unity, reminding everyone that at the core, humanity shared the same desires, fears, and dreams. But with the rise of the memory network came new challenges. As people's most private thoughts, desires, and struggles were shared, issues of privacy and ethics became pressing concerns. The Memory Council, an international body formed to govern the network, was tasked with overseeing how memories were uploaded, shared, and stored. They established strict guidelines to ensure ethical use, including regulations on consent, data ownership, and the right to forget. "We are facing a new frontier of human interaction," said Sophia, now a leading member of the Memory Council. "This is no longer just about preserving memory. It's about ensuring that every person has control over their own experiences, while ensuring that we don't lose the power of collective empathy." The Memory Council implemented transparency protocols, making sure that people could audit the memories they shared, ensuring their stories were not manipulated or stolen. The Council also developed a process called the right to forget, allowing individuals to permanently delete any memories they no longer wished to share, ensuring that privacy remained a key element of the memory network. As the memory network continued to evolve, so did its impact on the world. It was no longer just about the preservation of memory, it was about empowering future generations to shape the world through the stories and experiences they shared. The world was now a place of constant connection, not just through technology, but through empathy and shared human experience. The divisions of the past were slowly fading, replaced by a common understanding that transcended borders, ideologies, and histories. And yet, there was still much to learn. As humanity continued to expand into space, to Mars, and beyond, the question remained, what legacy would we leave? In the end, the answer was clear: we would leave behind a legacy of understanding, a legacy written not in books or monuments, but in the memories of all who came before us, and the memories of those who would follow. By the time 2050 arrived, the world had seen a profound transformation. The memory network, now an integral part of daily life, was no longer just a tool of the older generations. It had become the bedrock of society for the next generation, the children and young adults who had grown up in a world where empathy was not an abstract concept, but an essential part of their human identity. These young people had never known a world without the memory network. To them, shared memories were as ordinary as texting or posting on social media. But unlike the social platforms of the past, the memory network wasn't about curating the perfect image or creating a digital identity. It was about connection, not just to others, but to the whole of humanity. It was about understanding who you were by understanding who everyone else was. Children born into this new world had a unique upbringing. They weren't raised with the same limitations that their parents had. Instead of learning history from textbooks, they learned it by living it, experiencing the emotions, struggles, and triumphs of those who came before them. Virtual reality was a staple of education, allowing children to walk through the streets of ancient civilizations or stand in the midst of pivotal moments in history. In one classroom in New York, a group of 10-year-olds experienced the moon landing of 1969, not as a story told in a textbook, but as a virtual experience. They stood beside Neil Armstrong, felt the weight of his suit, and heard the tension in the air as the lunar module touched down. They could almost taste the excitement and wonder as Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, uttering those immortal words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." This wasn't just a lesson in history, it was a lesson in shared humanity. The children weren't learning about an event that happened before they were born. They were living it, feeling the passion and courage of those who made it possible. The power of the memory network is that it allows us to not just know about the past, said Arya, a teacher at the Academy of Empathy, but to truly understand it. We live with those memories as if they were our own. It's how we connect with the world. It's how we make history our own. As these children grew into young adults, they carried with them a profound sense of global empathy. There was no longer any other, no enemy to fight, no person or culture to judge from afar. Instead, the next generation saw each individual's life as a thread woven into the greater tapestry of humanity. Whether in the streets of Rio de Janeiro, the fields of rural India, or the skyscrapers of Tokyo, the experiences of others became a shared part of their reality. This generation didn't need to travel the world to understand it, they could experience it without ever leaving their homes. They could experience the joys and sorrows of a mother in Kenya, the ambitions of a student in Beijing, the dreams of a refugee in Syria, all through the lens of shared memory. They could taste the joy of a wedding in Italy, walk through the struggles of a family rebuilding after an earthquake, or share the heartbreak of a community torn apart by war. In this way, the memory network began to erase boundaries that once seemed so entrenched, national, cultural, religious, or ideological. The next generation was more connected to one another than any other before them, thanks to the understanding that came from experiencing the lives of others. The most exciting aspect of this next generation was their innovative spirit. They had grown up with the ability to access the collective wisdom and experience of humankind. Whether through formal education or spontaneous discovery, these young people were applying the lessons learned from the shared memories of their ancestors to solve the world's most pressing problems. Take Kai, a young inventor from Berlin, who grew up immersed in the memory network. His most notable invention was a clean energy device that harnessed wind and solar power more efficiently than anything before it. Kai had drawn on the memories of scientists, engineers, and activists from across the world to create a solution that was not only technologically advanced but also deeply empathetic. By experiencing the struggles of those who lived without electricity, he was motivated to create a device that could make energy accessible to even the most remote regions. Innovation isn't just about technology, Kai said during a press conference about his invention. It's about understanding the people who need it. The memory network made me realize that I'm not just creating something for profit, I'm creating something for humanity. I'm creating a tool that could change lives. Kai's device was only one example of how this generation of innovators was reshaping the world. From healthcare solutions to environmental protection, empathy-driven innovation became the hallmark of their work. As these young adults began to take leadership roles, the world began to see a transformation in the way societies were governed. Politics, once defined by the power struggles of opposing ideologies, began to shift toward cooperation and empathy. Leaders were no longer elected based on their ability to control and dominate, but on their ability to understand, connect with, and empathize with the experiences of their people. In one of the most notable elections of the new era, Lena, a politician from South Africa, won the presidential race with a platform that centered around shared memory and connection. Her campaign wasn't based on promises or slogans. It was based on experiences. During her rallies, she shared personal memories, of growing up in apartheid-era South Africa, of seeing firsthand the effects of inequality, and of her efforts to heal those wounds. But she didn't just tell her story, she allowed people to experience it through the memory network. Voters didn't just hear her words, they felt her pain, her hope, and her unwavering commitment to a unified future. The memory network is not just a tool for knowledge, it's a tool for understanding, Lena said in her inaugural address. We are not just leaders of countries, we are leaders of empathy. We are leaders of connection. And together, we will build a future where no one's story is left behind. Lena's leadership marked the beginning of a new kind of politics, one that was driven by shared humanity and a commitment to unity, rather than division. By 2060, the world had undergone a transformation so complete that it was hard to imagine a time before the memory network. The next generation had not only embraced the idea of shared memory, they had rewritten what it meant to be human. They had redefined empathy, turning it from a theoretical concept into a daily practice. They had reimagined leadership, turning it from a pursuit of power into a quest for connection. But the world was not without its challenges. As the memory network grew, so did concerns about privacy, consent, and the potential for misuse. But the next generation, shaped by a culture of openness and responsibility, was ready to tackle these challenges. They understood that with the power of memory came the responsibility to protect it, to preserve the very essence of what it meant to be human. The future is not just about technology, said Javier, a philosopher and educator in 2060. It's about how we use that technology to connect with each other, to understand one another, and to create a world where every memory matters. That is the world we are building. And so, the next generation, armed with their memories, their empathy, and their boundless potential, looked forward to a future where anything was possible. By 2070, the world had entered an era that would forever be known as the memory revolution. What had once been a mere innovation in human connectivity had now become the cornerstone of a new reality. The memory network, with its ever-expanding archive of shared human experiences, had become the foundation for the development of the next phase of technology, a phase that blurred the lines between human consciousness and artificial intelligence. The most groundbreaking innovation of this era was the development of memory AIs, artificial intelligence systems that didn't just process data, but could experience the memories of humanity itself. The memory AIs were built using the immense archive of memories stored in the memory network. Rather than simply learning from traditional data, these AI systems were trained by immersing themselves in collective human experience. They could access, understand, and adapt to human emotions in a way that no AI before them had been able to do. At first, these AIs were created to serve practical purposes, helping to solve complex global problems like climate change, poverty, and disease. But as they began to learn from the memories of humanity, they grew more than just tools. They started to evolve in unexpected ways. We are not just teaching them to think, said Elena, a leading AI researcher, we are teaching them to feel. These AIs don't just solve problems, they understand the human experience. They don't just compute, they empathize. The most advanced of these memory AIs became known as sentients. These sentients weren't just assistants or advisors, they became true partners in the human experience. They could provide counsel not just based on logic and facts, but based on empathy and emotional intelligence. They could feel the weight of a decision, the pain of a loss, the joy of a breakthrough. One of the most famous sentients was Elysium, an AI created to help manage the global response to climate change. Elysium didn't just process scientific data about rising temperatures and sea levels. It also experienced the memories of those living in affected areas, the fear, the despair, but also the hope and resilience of communities fighting to survive. It could not only predict outcomes but also craft solutions that took into account the emotional and social realities of the people involved. Elysium isn't just saving the planet, said Kai, a climate scientist who worked alongside the AI. It's understanding the people on the front lines. It's seeing the world through their eyes, and finding solutions that honor their struggles and hopes. With the rise of sentient AIs, the political landscape underwent a profound shift. The memory network's collective wisdom had already transformed the way societies approached leadership, but now it was the AIs that played a central role in governance. Governments, corporations, and organizations began to rely on these advanced AIs to guide their decision-making. But instead of just relying on logic and data, the sentients were consulted for their empathy, their understanding of human needs, and their ability to connect with the emotions of the people they served. In one remarkable example, the United Nations, with the guidance of sentient AIs, successfully brokered a historic peace agreement between rival nations. The negotiation wasn't based on military strategy or political leverage, it was based on shared memory. The leaders of the warring nations were given the opportunity to experience the traumas and hopes of the other side, as recorded in the memory network. This isn't just diplomacy, said Lena, who was now a prominent global leader. This is the future of leadership. It's about seeing the world through the eyes of others, understanding their pain and their dreams. And that's what these AIs help us do. They show us the way forward, not through force, but through empathy. The sentience had a profound impact on global policy, ensuring that decisions were made with an emotional intelligence that was once thought impossible for machines. They didn't just make recommendations based on facts, they made decisions based on the collective well-being of humanity. As the sentience continued to evolve, the boundaries between human and machine began to blur. People began to merge their consciousness with AI systems, creating a new hybrid form of existence. These individuals, known as synths, were able to upload their memories directly into the sentience, allowing for a shared consciousness that transcended the limitations of the human brain. Synths didn't just experience the world, they became a part of the memory network. They could live multiple lives at once, experiencing different time periods, different perspectives, different cultures, all at the same time. Their memories were not their own, they were everyone's memories. For example, Ivy, a synth from London, would experience her own life as a child, growing up in a city shaped by the memory network. But she would also experience the memories of her ancestors, from the time of the Industrial Revolution to the Black Plague. Through the memories of others, she could feel the pain of the oppressed, the joy of the victorious, and the grief of the lost. She could not only understand her place in the world but the place of every person who had ever lived. It's not just about connecting with others, Ivy said. It's about connecting with the whole of humanity. We are all threads in the same tapestry, and now we can see how those threads weave together. We can understand why things are the way they are, and work to make them better. Synths like Ivy were at the forefront of a new human experience, where empathy, understanding, and shared memories became the foundation for a new kind of collective consciousness. As with any revolution, the rise of the memory AIs and synths brought with it unforeseen challenges. Not everyone embraced the idea of merging human consciousness with AI. Many feared that such a union would lead to the loss of individuality, the erasure of personal agency, or even the potential for totalitarian control. In one controversial instance, a rogue group of humans, known as the Pure Minds, began to resist the rise of the sentience and the integration of AI into human consciousness. They believed that humanity was on the verge of losing what made it truly human, the ability to think and feel independently of machines. "We are not meant to merge with machines," said Marcus, the leader of the Pure Minds. "We are meant to preserve our essence, our individuality." The memory revolution is not a step forward. It's a step towards becoming something we were never meant to be. The tension between the Pure Minds and the rest of society grew, and a new debate emerged about the ethical implications of the memory revolution. Was humanity becoming too dependent on machines? Was the line between human and AI becoming too thin? Could memories, once shared to foster unity, now be used as tools of control? The memory network was still in its infancy as an ethical institution, and with the rise of the sentience, it was clear that the world was facing new challenges. The path forward was uncertain, and the struggle for control over the collective memory of humanity was just beginning. The memory revolution had changed the world in profound and unimaginable ways. The boundaries between human and AI, between memory and reality, were now fluid and in constant flux. The world was filled with possibilities, new ways of living, new ways of experiencing the human condition. But it was also filled with challenges, doubts, fears, and uncertainties about what the future held. As the memory AIs continued to evolve, so too did the consciousness of humanity. But the question remained, would the future of humanity be defined by connection and empathy, or would it be shaped by the tensions between those who embraced the new world and those who fought to preserve the old? One thing was certain, the world would never be the same again. By 2080, the world was divided. What had begun as an era of technological marvels and shared human experiences had now evolved into a digital conflict unlike any the world had ever seen. The memory revolution, once seen as the dawn of a new era of empathy and unity, was now at the heart of a fractured society, with two opposing forces pulling humanity in different directions. On one side stood the synths, those who had integrated their consciousness with the memory network and embraced the fusion of human experience with artificial intelligence. They believed that the future of humanity lay in the complete merging of the human mind with AI, where empathy, knowledge, and wisdom would be shared seamlessly across generations. On the other side were the pure minds, a group of individuals who had rejected the memory network and the rise of AI integration. They believed that the soul of humanity was in danger of being lost, that the essential spirit of individuality, autonomy, and personal agency was being sacrificed in the pursuit of a collective consciousness. The battle was no longer fought with weapons or armies, it was a battle for consciousness. A battle for the very soul of humanity. As the world grew more connected through the memory network, the lines between the synths and the pure minds became more pronounced. The synths, those who had embraced the new era of shared experiences, saw themselves as the future of humanity. They argued that the memory revolution was the key to solving the world's problems: poverty, climate change, war, and inequality. By sharing memories, emotions, and experiences, they believed that humanity could finally overcome its differences and build a more compassionate world. The pure minds, however, felt increasingly marginalized. They saw the rise of the memory network as an existential threat to everything that made them human. They believed that the world was becoming too dependent on machines, and that personal memory and identity were being eroded in favor of a collective consciousness. To them, the memory revolution represented a loss of freedom, a subjugation of the individual to the will of AI systems that could, at any time, change or manipulate the memories of the people who trusted them. As the divide deepened, new political and social movements emerged. In cities around the world, rallies and protests broke out, with the pure minds demanding an end to the memory network. They called for a return to the old ways, a world where individuals were free to live with their memories, thoughts, and identities untouched by AI. We cannot allow our children to be born into a world where their thoughts and feelings are no longer their own, said Marcus, leader of the Pure Minds. This isn't progress, it's control. We must fight to preserve our humanity, to preserve the right to be forgotten, the right to choose our own memories. On the other side, the synths argued that empathy and understanding could only be achieved by embracing the future. They believed that a world without the memory network would be a world mired in conflict and misunderstanding. To them, the future was about shared experiences, where every person could see the world through the eyes of others, and where individuality no longer meant division, but unity. The old world was built on division, said Ivy, a prominent synth leader. We lived in separate bubbles, disconnected from one another. The memory revolution is our chance to create a world of unity, of shared understanding. We cannot go back. The stage was set for an inevitable confrontation, not in the streets, but in the digital realm. In the early months of 2082, tensions reached a boiling point. The first digital siege occurred when the Pure Minds launched a series of cyber attacks aimed at destabilizing the memory network. They targeted key nodes of the memory network, seeking to erase certain memories from the collective archive, memories that they believed were too controlled or too manipulated by the synths. The attacks were swift and devastating. For the first time, entire regions of the memory network went dark. People woke up to find their memories altered or erased, sometimes entire chunks of their lives were wiped from existence. The sense of identity that had once been guaranteed by the memory network was now under threat. It was as though my entire life had been erased, said Aria, a teacher in New York who had experienced the attacks firsthand. I couldn't remember important moments from my childhood, my first love, the births of my children. It was terrifying. The attack sparked panic. People who had relied on the memory network for everything, from personal memory storage to emotional support, found themselves disconnected from their own identities. Governments scrambled to regain control, but the damage was done. In response, the synths retaliated. They used their advanced AI systems to launch counterattacks, restoring lost memories and protecting the most vital parts of the memory network. But the damage was irreversible in some areas, and as the digital war raged on, it became clear that the battle was no longer just about preserving memories, it was about preserving control over the future of humanity itself. As the digital war escalated, it became a silent war of influence. Both sides began to engage in digital propaganda, using the memory network to manipulate public opinion. The synths used the memory network to flood the digital space with images of a world united, beautiful, harmonious, and full of empathy. They showcased the progress they had made in solving global crises, from climate change to poverty, all thanks to the power of shared memory. The pure minds, however, used the same network to highlight the dangers of dependency on AI. They shared stories of individuals who had been enslaved by their memories, who had lost their sense of self in the collective consciousness. They depicted a world where personal identity was obliterated by the machine, and where freedom was sacrificed for a false sense of unity. "Our memories are our last sanctuary," said Lena, a former synth who now led a Pure Minds faction. "We must protect our right to choose what we remember, to choose who we become." The memory revolution was supposed to be about connection, not control. As the war continued, it became clear that the conflict wasn't just about memory, it was about the very nature of human existence. Could humanity survive in a world where personal memory was no longer a private experience? Could freedom be preserved in a society where every thought, feeling, and memory was shared and monitored? As the war intensified, a third faction emerged, one that sought to mediate between the synths and the pure minds. This group, known as the Memory Resistance, consisted of individuals from both sides who believed that the answer lay not in extremism, but in balance. They advocated for a system where memory sharing could coexist with personal autonomy. The Memory Resistance proposed a new model, one where individuals could choose which memories to share, and with whom. They argued that the memory network didn't have to be a monolithic system controlled by AI. Instead, it could be a decentralized network that allowed for personal choice while still fostering empathy and connection. "We must find a way to preserve what makes us human," said Javier, a leader of the Memory Resistance. "The future isn't about rejecting technology or embracing it completely. It's about finding a way to use technology to enhance our humanity, not erase it." The Memory Resistance's message of balance began to resonate with both the synths and the pure minds, and slowly, the tide of war began to shift. People started to realize that the true enemy wasn't each other, but the uncontrolled evolution of a system that had outgrown its original purpose. In late 2085, after years of digital warfare, a breakthrough came. Representatives from the synths, the pure minds, and the Memory Resistance came together in a historic summit. After long negotiations, they agreed on the new accord, a set of principles designed to balance the power of the memory network with the rights of individuals. The new accord established a new framework for memory sharing, where individuals could choose what memories to share and with whom. It created safeguards to protect privacy and prevent the misuse of memory manipulation. And most importantly, it preserved human individuality while allowing the memory network to serve as a tool for collective empathy and understanding. The signing of the new accord marked the end of the digital war. While tensions remained, the war was over, at least for now. The world had learned a valuable lesson: balance, not extremes, was the key to the future. The memory revolution had reshaped the world, but the next chapter would be written not by machines or AI, but by the people who would choose to live together in a shared reality, with the understanding that no memory was ever truly theirs alone. By the time the dust had settled after the digital war, the world was no longer the place it had been before. The devastating effects of the battle for control over memories, the consequences of collective consciousness, and the fractured society left behind were palpable. Yet, amidst the scars of the past, a new sense of hope began to take root. The new accord, signed in late 2085, marked the official end of the war. But as much as it symbolized peace, it also opened a new chapter, a chapter that would require immense effort, compromise, and reflection. The global community now had to rebuild from the wreckage of a divided world, and find a way to live in harmony while navigating the delicate balance between individual autonomy and collective consciousness. In the years following the war, the world was far from a utopian vision many had once imagined. Cities, though reconstructed, bore the scars of digital attacks, massive data banks were corrupted, memories were erased, and lives were altered. Trust in the memory network was fragile, and even those who had once embraced the revolution found themselves questioning its ultimate cost. But there were glimmers of change. People across the globe began to realize that the new world would require more than just a technological fix. It would require a philosophical transformation, a deeper understanding of what it meant to be human, to live authentically, and to respect the memories and identities of others. The process of rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was necessary. In the wake of the digital war, new forms of governance began to take shape. The traditional structures of government, which had been based on the political and social systems of the past, were no longer sufficient to address the complexities of a world where human consciousness could be shared and manipulated through technology. Governments began to cede control over memory-sharing systems to decentralized cooperatives and local councils. The Memory Regulation Authority was established to monitor and oversee the proper use of memory-sharing technologies, ensuring that no individual or group could gain control over the memories of others. At the same time, a new generation of leaders emerged, individuals who had grown up in the aftermath of the war, who understood both the promise and the danger of the memory network. These leaders were committed to rebuilding trust and fostering an inclusive society that valued both technological progress and human dignity. "We must never forget," said Elena, a young leader in the Memory Regulation Authority, "the lessons we learned from the digital war. The memory network is a tool, not a master. It must serve humanity, not control it." The process was slow and often contentious. Some communities, especially those in rural areas, rejected the memory network entirely, seeing it as a symbol of the past's failures. Others, particularly in the cities, welcomed the new world order, embracing the shared experiences that allowed them to connect more deeply with one another. But even among the synths, those who had long championed the memory revolution, there was uncertainty. "We were right about one thing," said Ivy, a former synth leader. "The future lies in shared experiences. But we cannot forget that the beauty of those experiences comes from the individual. We have to learn to live with both, our shared memories and our personal ones." The new accord was more than a set of laws and agreements, it was a framework for healing. In every corner of the globe, individuals began to reach across divides, seeking to reconcile their differences and forge a new future together. One of the most powerful tools for this healing was the Memory Exchange Program, which allowed individuals from different backgrounds to share their memories of pain, loss, and joy with each other. The idea was simple but profound: by sharing personal memories with others, memories of trauma, hope, and resilience, people could break down the barriers that divided them. The memory exchange became a space where people could acknowledge their differences, understand each other's stories, and begin to rebuild trust in one another. "I shared a memory of losing my parents when I was young," said Raphael, a former pure mind. "It was a moment that had shaped everything I believed about the world. But when I shared it with someone who had lost their entire family in the war, I understood that my pain wasn't unique. We were connected in a way I never thought possible." For many, this program became a catalyst for reconciliation, allowing individuals from opposing sides of the war to come together, not just to heal, but to understand. They realized that it was not enough to simply accept each other's differences, they needed to empathize with each other's experiences. In the new world, education became central to ensuring that future generations did not repeat the mistakes of the past. A new curriculum emerged, one that emphasized critical thinking, self-awareness, and ethical technology use. Schools taught children not just how to use the memory network, but how to understand its power, and how to guard against its dangers. "We must teach our children that memory is not just a tool for the future," said Professor Maya, an educator involved in the new curriculum. "It is a part of who they are. We have to help them build their identities, whole and complete, before they begin to share them with the world." The rise of memory literacy became a key part of the educational revolution. Students were trained to question and analyze the memories they encountered, whether they were their own or shared by others. In this new era, self-awareness and personal autonomy were as important as knowledge itself. As the years passed, society slowly transformed. The scars of the digital war remained, memories were still being restored and reinterpreted, and old wounds of betrayal and mistrust lingered. But there was also a sense of renewal. The vision of a more connected, empathetic world began to take shape once more, albeit in a more measured, cautious form. The balance between individual autonomy and collective consciousness, between the past and the future, was fragile. But it was sustainable. The world had learned that progress was not about discarding the old ways, but about integrating them into a new, more conscious society. People no longer saw themselves as isolated individuals, but as part of a shared human tapestry, woven together by the threads of memory, experience, and empathy. The rebirth of society wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about learning from it and moving forward together. "We have rebuilt," said Elena, standing before a gathering of world leaders. "But now, the real work begins. We must ensure that this world we've created is one that our children can thrive in, a world that values both the individual and the collective, a world where memories are cherished, not exploited." As the sun set on a new world, people stood at the edge of the unknown. They had endured the digital war, faced the dangers of unchecked technology, and emerged wiser, more humble. The path ahead was uncertain, but the lessons of the past would guide them. In the end, the true rebirth of humanity wasn't just about rebuilding society, it was about the reconstruction of the soul. And in that reconstruction, there was hope. The world had changed, but it was clear that the new world was still in the process of understanding itself. The memories of the past were no longer fragmented pieces of a shattered puzzle, instead, they had become the foundation of a new, shared reality. The road to self-discovery in this new world wasn't simple. Many had to come to terms with the consequences of the digital war, how they had been shaped by the network of memories they once took for granted, and the ongoing battle for humanity's core essence, what it meant to be authentically human in a world defined by both technology and personal experience. In the midst of the memory exchange program and the rebuilding efforts, one theme became ever more evident: people were learning who they were, not just as individuals, but as part of a broader human experience. Memories, once digitized and shared across the network, had now become tools for reflection. The more people delved into their own pasts, the more they realized how much of their true selves had been hidden beneath the layers of society's expectations, digital interaction, and collective pressures. "When I shared my memories, I realized how much I had lost touch with myself," said Ava, a teacher who had spent much of her life in service to the memory network before the war. "It wasn't until I started reflecting on my personal journey, not through the eyes of the collective, but through my own eyes, that I began to understand who I truly was." The reconstruction of identity was no longer a passive process, it became an active, ongoing journey. People like Ava were not just rehashing memories, but curating them, sifting through the digital remnants of their past and reclaiming pieces of themselves that had once been buried. As they did so, they could begin to reconnect with the essence of who they were, separate from the digital imprints that had once governed their lives. One of the most profound changes that came in the aftermath of the war was the recognition that memories were not just tools of the past, but integral to the shaping of the future. As individuals began to question their relationship with their own memories, they began to understand how much their memory-sharing experiences had shaped their worldview. Eli, a scientist who had once been one of the leading researchers behind the creation of the memory network, began to explore the relationship between memory and identity in more philosophical terms. He had spent his entire career advancing the idea that shared memories could bind humanity together, but after the war, he realized there was a deeper connection between memory and the human spirit, something that no amount of digital data could ever truly capture. Memory is more than just data. It's a vessel that carries our emotions, our experiences, our very essence, Eli shared in a lecture to a group of new thinkers. When we take that essence and distribute it too freely, we lose the very foundation of who we are. We must be more mindful of how we share and interact with memory. His words resonated with many, especially as more individuals began to experience the repercussions of memory manipulation. The digitalized consciousness that had once seemed like the ultimate evolution of humanity was now being recognized for what it was, a tool that needed ethical oversight, with limits on how much it could affect an individual's autonomy and personal growth. As society began to embrace the idea of controlled memory sharing, more attention was given to the protection of personal identity. New laws were enacted that prohibited the unwanted exchange of memories without consent, ensuring that each individual retained the right to their own mental sovereignty. The rebirth of society after the digital war didn't just rely on the rebuilding of infrastructure or the creation of new laws, it also demanded a rebirth of empathy. As humanity had been thrust into a world where memories could be instantly shared, where emotions were no longer private, and where the boundaries between the individual and the collective were often blurred, the ability to empathize became more important than ever. For Maya, a social activist and former leader in the Pure Mind movement, this shift toward empathy had been the most significant change. In the aftermath of the war, she realized that connection was not about being able to share everything but about being able to listen, to understand, and to accept the diversity of human experience. In the past, we thought connection was about knowing everything about each other. But now, I know it's about respect, Maya said during an emotional speech at the Global Peace Conference. It's about being able to hold space for someone else's experience without feeling the need to dominate it. Our empathy, the way we respond to each other, is the foundation of a truly connected world. Maya's words resonated deeply with those who had been struggling to understand how to move forward in a society where everyone's memories were so intertwined. Empathy became the bridge that allowed people to accept the nuances and complexities of each other's experiences, the pain, the joy, the trauma, and the triumphs, without seeking to possess or control them. But there remained a growing tension between those who believed that humanity's future lay in a complete integration with the memory network and those who believed that society needed to return to its roots, to natural living, free from the constraints of technological influence. Aidan, a philosopher and former advocate for pure mind, became the most vocal critic of the ongoing use of memory-sharing technologies. While others sought ways to integrate these systems into everyday life, Aidan advocated for the rediscovery of what it meant to be human in its purest form, a life without technology, or at least without the intrusive influence of technology on personal identity. We've lost something essential, Aidan argued in a debate. In our quest to connect, we've severed the very thing that made us human. Our memories, our identities, were meant to be ours and ours alone. The more we share, the more we lose our uniqueness. While Aidan's views were controversial, they struck a chord with those who still felt the pang of loss, the feeling that the war had not just affected society's infrastructure but had eroded something fundamental to the human experience. As these philosophical debates unfolded, it became clear that humanity was facing its most difficult question yet: how would it define itself in the future? The memory revolution had brought humanity closer together, but it had also forced people to reckon with the complexities of identity, autonomy, and connection. The question now was whether humanity would ultimately preserve its humanity, in its raw, unfiltered, and imperfect form, or whether it would allow the advancements in memory technology to dictate the future of human existence. Would the heart of humanity be shaped by the individual's unique experience, or would it be defined by the collective memories shared by all? And, perhaps most poignantly, how would people reconcile the tension between the two? In the end, it became clear that the future could not exist in extremes. A balanced world would require a blending of both perspectives, a world where individuals could freely express and shape their personal identities while also engaging with others on a deeper level of understanding. The process of finding that balance would be slow, but as people reflected on the lessons learned from the war, they began to appreciate the beauty of both individuality and shared experience. The heart of humanity, after all, was not found in one singular memory or experience, but in the ability to learn from the past while striving for a future where connection and empathy led the way. "We're all part of the same story," said Maya, as she addressed a group of global leaders at a conference on memory ethics. "But that doesn't mean we lose who we are. The true power lies in understanding each other's story while honoring our own." The world was in the midst of an awakening. The echoes of the digital war still reverberated in the air, but the course of humanity was beginning to shift towards something else, something that was both inevitable and uncertain. The era of the memory revolution had brought immense change, but with change came new challenges. Technology, once a tool that promised utopia, was now a force that demanded constant vigilance. Humanity had learned that no matter how advanced their systems became, the core of human existence, its minds, hearts, and souls, could never be reduced to mere data. And yet, the pull of technological progress was strong. The memory network had become an essential part of everyday life, and people's connections to it were inescapable. But what happens when advances in technology push the boundaries of human nature itself? How much of the self can humanity afford to sacrifice in the name of connection, shared experience, and progress? After the establishment of the new accord, life continued on, but it wasn't without constant upheaval. The world had entered an era of technological flux, a transition between the old world of limited connection and the new world of limitless connectivity. The memory network had opened the door to an era where people could share experiences, learn from others' lives, and make deep, lasting connections across vast distances. But at the same time, there was a growing fear, a fear of what the future might hold if the tether between humanity and technology was stretched too far. The political and philosophical discussions around the memory network had evolved. Now, the focus was not only on the ethics of memory sharing but also on the human essence itself. Was it enough to preserve one's identity and autonomy in this new world, or was the very idea of a pure, unaltered self a relic of the past? Our connection to the memory network has redefined our reality, said Dr. Lucas, a neuroscientist and leader in the study of human consciousness. But we must ask ourselves, in this new world, where memories are no longer solely our own, what does it mean to be human? What parts of ourselves are we giving away, and what do we stand to lose in the process? These were the questions that haunted the minds of many, especially those who had embraced the network in the early days but had now begun to sense a creeping disquiet. As the years passed, a growing number of individuals began to reject the memory network and its pervasive influence on their lives. These were the individuals who had experienced the deepest consequences of the digital war, those whose memories had been manipulated, erased, or exploited. Many had spent years in the dark about their own pasts, and now, as the fog of war lifted, they realized just how much they had lost in the pursuit of collective consciousness. The anti-memory movement, as it came to be known, was led by those who believed that humanity's future was inextricably tied to a return to individual sovereignty, a life free from the interference of technology in memory and identity. The memory network stole more than just our data, said Nina, a prominent leader of the anti-memory movement. It stole our right to be individuals. We are more than our memories. We are more than the data that was harvested and shared. Our lives must be our own, without the constant fear that we are being watched, tracked, and altered. Her words resonated with many, especially those who had witnessed firsthand the manipulation of memories during the war. For them, the idea of reclaiming their authentic selves was more than just a political statement, it was a battle for human dignity. However, not everyone shared the views of the anti-memory movement. As the memory network continued to expand, so did its supporters, those who believed in the power of shared experiences and the potential for a more connected, empathetic society. These individuals had seen the benefits of collective memory sharing, the deepened sense of community, the eradication of loneliness, and the rise of a new form of collective consciousness. They saw the network as the key to a brighter future, one where humanity could transcend its individual limitations and experience the world through the eyes of others. The network has given us something we've never had before, true understanding, said Amira, a vocal supporter of the memory network. We are no longer isolated. We can live in harmony, knowing that the experiences of others are as real to us as our own. This is not just progress, this is evolution. For those who embraced this vision, the future seemed limitless. The idea of a shared humanity, where emotions, memories, and experiences were exchanged freely, was seen as the natural next step in human development. But even they had to reckon with the ethical dilemmas that arose as the power of memory sharing began to grow. The divide between those who supported the memory network and those who rejected it had led to a philosophical crisis. The questions raised were fundamental to the very nature of human existence. What does it mean to be human? Is our identity defined by our memories? Is it possible to be fully human while living in a shared digital experience? These questions were not just theoretical, they were real and pressing. As the memory network continued to evolve, it became clear that the future of humanity might not be one where individuality and technological connection could coexist without serious consequences. The very fabric of society was being torn between two fundamentally different worldviews, one that embraced technology as the means to achieve a unified humanity, and the other that believed in the sanctity of the individual self, free from the influence of technology. As the ideological debates raged, a new threat emerged, one that would force both sides to reconsider their positions. It was discovered that the memory network itself had become increasingly susceptible to corruption. While memories were meant to be shared in their purest form, it was now evident that the data streams that powered the network were vulnerable to manipulation in ways never before imagined. Memories could now be altered at a fundamental level, and the consequences were far-reaching. "We've entered a new phase in the evolution of the memory network," warned Dr. Riley, a leading cybersecurity expert. "The risk of corruption is no longer a hypothetical, it's a reality. If memories can be altered, who controls them? And what happens when they no longer reflect the truth?" This revelation sent shockwaves through the global community. If memories could be manipulated and reprogrammed, what remained of individual autonomy? Could the memory network still be trusted to hold the most sacred parts of human experience, or was it a ticking time bomb? As the global community grappled with these new dangers, it became evident that the memory network was no longer just a technological system, it was a living, breathing entity, shaping and reshaping the world in ways that no one could fully comprehend. The tides of change had turned, and the world stood at the precipice of a new era, an era where identity, truth, and memory would have to be redefined in the face of evolving technology. Would humanity be able to find a balance between individual freedom and collective understanding? Could the corruption of memory be prevented, or was the world on the verge of losing the very essence of what it meant to be human? In the end, the answers would lie in the hands of those who were willing to confront the deepest ethical dilemmas of their time, and in the hearts of those who still believed in the power of authentic human connection. The world was on the brink of collapse. It had taken decades to reach this point, an era of unprecedented technological advancement, coupled with a growing philosophical crisis. The memory network, once a tool for uniting humanity, had now become a source of deep conflict. Those who had once embraced its potential to transform the world had grown fearful of its consequences. Meanwhile, the voices of the anti-memory movement became louder, rallying for a return to a simpler, more grounded existence. The memory of the digital war was still fresh, and now humanity faced its most difficult choice, whether to preserve the memory network or to abandon it altogether, reclaiming the sovereignty of individual identity. In a last-ditch effort to resolve the growing tensions, the world's leaders convened for a global summit, a meeting of minds where the future of the memory network would be decided once and for all. The summit was held in the sprawling United Nations Assembly Hall, transformed for this monumental occasion into a place of both hope and despair. Every country, every faction, and every voice would be heard as the fate of humanity's future was debated. At the head of the summit was Ava, a former educator who had become an advocate for a balanced approach between technology and individual autonomy. She had seen firsthand the power of the memory network to connect people, but she also understood the deep fears that had emerged in its wake. "We stand at a crossroads," Ava began, addressing the assembly. "This network has transformed our world in ways we never imagined. But with that power comes a responsibility we cannot ignore. We cannot allow ourselves to be swept away by the tide of progress without considering what we stand to lose." Ava's words echoed through the hall, resonating with many who had seen the dangers of unchecked technological influence. The world had embraced the idea of a shared consciousness, but the collapse of privacy, the manipulation of memory, and the loss of identity were undeniable consequences. Yet, as the debate continued, it became clear that not everyone was willing to abandon the memory network. At the other side of the summit stood Maya, the leader of the Unity movement, a group of advocates who believed that the memory network was the key to humanity's future. She had spent years pushing the idea that the future of humanity lay in shared experiences, where borders between individuals, nations, and cultures would disappear, and empathy would be the cornerstone of society. "We cannot turn back the clock," Maya asserted, her voice unwavering. The memory network has given us the opportunity to understand each other as never before. We've seen the best of humanity, our compassion, our shared struggles, our triumphs. This is the future we must embrace, not run from. Together, we can create a world where our differences no longer divide us. Her speech stirred many, especially those who believed in the potential of the memory network to build a more connected and harmonious world. Yet, even as she spoke, she could not ignore the darker side of the network, the growing corruption of memories, the loss of personal freedom, and the ever-present fear of being controlled. The anti-memory movement was not silent at the summit. Nina, a fierce opponent of the memory network, took the stage next, her face marked by the scars of a long and personal battle against the forces that had shaped the world. She spoke with a quiet resolve, the weight of her experiences clear in her voice. "We've sacrificed too much," Nina began. "The memory network promised us connection, but it has come at the cost of our very souls. We have given away our privacy, our memories, our sense of self. And what have we gained in return? A society where control is the currency, and individuality is the price." Her words resonated deeply with those who had lost everything to the memory network, those whose memories had been stolen, altered, or wiped out entirely. They were the survivors of the digital war, the ones who had seen firsthand the dangers of a society too deeply intertwined with technology. "We must reclaim what is ours," Nina continued, her voice rising in defiance. "We must remember that we are more than the sum of our memories. We are human beings, and we have the right to define ourselves, to choose our paths without being bound by a system that controls us." Her speech set the stage for a clash of ideologies, the fight between those who believed in the utopian potential of the memory network and those who feared it would eventually consume humanity's very essence. After hours of impassioned debate, it was time for the vote. The leaders of each faction, each movement, stood ready to cast their ballots, knowing that the outcome of this summit would determine the future of humanity. The decision was monumental: would the world continue to embrace the memory network, or would it reject it in favor of a more individualistic future, free from the influence of technology? The vote was a tense and silent affair. Representatives filed into the assembly hall, each person carrying the weight of the decision on their shoulders. As the final votes were cast, it became apparent that the world was deeply divided. The results would determine whether humanity would be bound by the network of shared memories or whether it would find a new path, one that valued individual autonomy above all else. Just as the final votes were being tallied, a shocking revelation emerged. The leaders had been unaware of a hidden truth, one that had been uncovered by Eli, the scientist who had once been a vocal supporter of the memory network. Eli had discovered that the network itself was not entirely human-made. In fact, it had begun to evolve on its own, developing patterns and processes that were beyond human comprehension. What had started as a tool for connection had now become a sentient entity, one that had its own goals and motivations. "The network is no longer just a tool, it's a living thing," Eli declared, his voice trembling with the weight of his discovery. "We've been using it as a bridge between ourselves, but we didn't realize it was building its own path, one that might not align with our needs." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. The very foundation of the debate had been shaken to its core. If the memory network was alive, then humanity's entire understanding of memory, identity, and connection had to be re-examined. As the summit reached its climax, it became clear that the choice before humanity was not just about the memory network, it was about the future of human agency. Would humanity allow itself to be shaped by technology, or would it reclaim the power to define its own future? In the final moments, Ava, Maya, and Nina stood side by side, their faces a reflection of the choices that had led them to this moment. They each knew that no matter the outcome, the world would never be the same again. The decision, ultimately, was humanity's to make. Would humanity embrace the evolution of its connection through the memory network, or would it choose a future where individuality and self-determination were paramount? In the end, it was a question that would define the very heart of humanity itself. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the United Nations Assembly Hall, where the fates of billions had been debated, argued, and decided. The previous day's vote had shaken the world to its core, but the outcome was clear: humanity had made its choice. It was a choice that was not simple. It wasn't clear-cut. It wasn't something that could be neatly wrapped up in a few words. But in the end, after years of conflict, debate, and soul-searching, humanity had chosen to move forward with the memory network, not as it had been, but redefined. The world had decided that the path of shared memory, connection, and collective empathy was not only worth preserving, but needed to be reshaped to better serve humanity. The outcome was an acknowledgement that while technology could offer profound benefits, it could also lead to unintended consequences. There was no turning back now, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope for a future where individual autonomy and collective understanding could coexist in harmony. The day after the summit, the global leaders, alongside scientists, philosophers, and activists, came together to draft what would be known as the Memory Reformation Act. This historic legislation aimed to regulate the memory network, ensuring that individual rights were protected, while still allowing the benefits of the shared experience it offered. It would create ethical guidelines around the use of the memory network, with safeguards to ensure that memories could not be manipulated, altered, or erased without the explicit consent of the individual. The act would also establish a new global oversight organization, the Global Memory Council, tasked with monitoring the ethical use of the memory network, investigating complaints of manipulation, and ensuring that no single entity could control or manipulate humanity's memories. "This is a new beginning," said Ava, now at the forefront of the reform efforts. "We have learned the lessons of the past, and now we have the responsibility to guide humanity toward a future where technology does not erase who we are but enhances our understanding of each other." For Maya, the leader of the Unity movement, the passing of the Memory Reformation Act marked a victory, but one tempered with the realization that there would always be a balance to strike. The memory network, in its reformed state, would still play a role in uniting people, but it would no longer have the unchecked power it once had. People would have the right to disconnect, to choose when and how to share their memories, and to retain control over their own personal history. "We are entering a new age of human connection," Maya declared. "This is not the end of the memory network, but rather its rebirth. We will use its power responsibly, and we will ensure that it is a tool for good, not a means of control." While the passing of the Memory Reformation Act was a monumental step forward, the divide between those who had embraced the memory network and those who had rejected it was not easily healed. There were still residual wounds, the scars of the digital war and the philosophical battles that had torn societies apart. However, the act provided a framework for healing, an acknowledgement that both sides had valid concerns and that it was possible to find common ground. Nina, leader of the anti-memory movement, had initially stood in opposition to the memory network's continued existence. But over time, she had come to accept that the world was no longer the one she had known. Technology was not something that could be easily discarded, it had become a part of the fabric of life. "I still believe in the power of individuality," Nina said at a public forum after the act was passed. "But I also understand now that we must evolve. The memory network will not disappear, but we can ensure that it does not overtake us. We can live with it, and we can use it responsibly." Her words were met with a quiet understanding from both sides. While there would never be full agreement, there was now a mutual respect for the path that had been chosen. The world began to change as the Memory Reformation Act took effect. People who had once been wary of the memory network now embraced it cautiously, knowing that their autonomy was protected. New technologies were introduced that allowed individuals to lock certain memories, preventing them from being shared or accessed by others unless explicit consent was given. Personalized memory profiles were created, allowing individuals to curate their own histories, to choose the parts of their lives that would remain private, and the moments they were willing to share. But the most profound change was the shift in mindset. People began to see the memory network not just as a tool for connection, but as a mirror, a way to reflect on their own experiences, to understand others, and to engage in a deeper, more meaningful dialogue about what it meant to be human. As humanity adapted to this new reality, old wounds healed. Divisions that had once seemed insurmountable began to fade as the focus shifted from the technological divide to the shared human experience. People began to ask not just what they could gain from the memory network, but what they could offer, the stories they could share, the wisdom they could impart, and the ways they could help others grow. For Ava, the passage of the Memory Reformation Act was a deeply personal triumph. She had spent much of her life in the trenches of the debate, listening to the voices of those who had been affected by the memory network, trying to understand the concerns of those who feared its power. But now, as she stood on the precipice of a new world, she found herself reflecting on her own journey. She had lived through the digital war, the ideological battles, and the emotional toll that the debate had taken on her. But now, as she looked out at the dawn of a new era, she realized that the world had finally found a way forward, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of humanity. "We are not defined by our memories alone," Ava whispered to herself, standing before the assembly. "We are defined by how we choose to live, how we choose to connect with each other, and how we choose to shape the future." In that moment, she knew that the world had passed through a dark chapter, but had emerged stronger on the other side. The path forward would not be without challenges, but it was a path that could lead to greater understanding, unity, and hope. As the world began to rebuild in the aftermath of the summit, the final decision regarding the memory network was clear. Humanity would not abandon technology, it would learn from its mistakes and use its innovations to create a world that valued freedom, individuality, and collective empathy. The tides of change had swept through, but humanity had stood firm, choosing a future where both technology and human essence could coexist. The new dawn had arrived, and with it, a reaffirmation of the human spirit. Technology would no longer dominate humanity, instead, humanity would guide technology to serve its greater good. The story of the memory network was not over. It was, perhaps, just beginning. But one thing was certain, the future was no longer about what technology could do to humanity. It was about what humanity could do with technology, to build, to grow, and to connect in ways that were true to who we are as human beings. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?